when we come to fasting in this modern world, we really have to look at how do we vary that feast-famine cycling. And when we're doing the same fast over and over again, it works in the beginning, but then you get stuck.
I feel like what brings a lot of people to intermittent fasting is the weight loss piece. And this ties into calorie restriction because that's typically how people quote unquote lose weight. That's part of most diet plans, exercise more and cut the calories.
Yep.
So for somebody, we're going to steer away from calorie restriction for now. We touched on that, and I think that's enough for that one. But when it comes to fasting, for somebody that's tuning in right now and their primary goal, at least to start, is to lose weight, given what we've talked about to this point, how would you modify things fasting and outside of fasting for somebody to really kickstart losing weight?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to train our bodies to fast, and we want to know as when you are on your starting your fasting journey, knowing why you're fasting is so incredibly helpful because it helps you start to take all of your food and compress it into the eating window. So let me tell you, let me explain the answer to that through a really cool interaction that I had with a man that was 300 pounds this summer. He came to me and he asked me to help him because he was like, I'm dying. I'm metabolically so unhealthy. I'm dying and I need your help. And when we broke down where his hurdles were, he had a massive food addiction problem. And it was to the standard American diet and drinking lots of soda all day long. So I knew if I took soda away, I knew if I started to make diet changes, I was just going to be another way that he was going to fail at another diet. So what I told him to do is just take all his food and start to work to compress it into an 8-hour eating window. And what we did is push his breakfast back an hour. And then after a week of that, we pushed his breakfast back another hour. And then by a month of pushing the breakfast back hour by hour, we started to get him into this 8-hour eating window, leaving 16 hours for fasting. In that 8-hour eating window, I want to point out, he drank like 10 sodas. He ate buffalo wings. Like he ate the bad diet that got him to 300 pounds. But just by taking his food and putting it into this eating window, he dropped 13 pounds that first month. So then the next month, we started to work a little bit on his food. I started to have him add in protein, still keeping him at 8-hour eating window. And then he dropped another 9 pounds. Then by the third month, we were able to start to look at soda. So I tell you all that study within 3 months, by the way, he dropped 40 pounds from we barely touched his food. We just worked on his eating window. So if you want to lose weight, I really feel like the first thing we've got to look at is when you eat, not what you eat. Now, I'm not telling you you have free license to eat whatever you want. But the way that our food system is right now, it has us all addicted to these high inflammatory foods. So if you're struggling to make the food change, let's start with the timing change first. Now, beyond that, there are foods that make you more hungry that you should probably avoid. And if you avoid them in your eating window, you will find that fasting gets easier and easier, and you will get metabolically healthier quicker and quicker. The number one food that I think everybody needs to change is bad oils. We need to get off the canola, the corn, the cottonseed. Those oils stay in your body. When you eat French fries at a restaurant done in vegetable oil, sitting in that rancid vegetable oil for weeks, and you eat those fries, that oil actually stays in your body. It's a debate anywhere from a year to 2 years. A lot of the fatty acid experts are saying it goes up to 2 years. So, that is the first shift that needs to happen. We got to get the good oils. And then the second thing, I love the keto movement, but if you don't want to count macros, just make a shift over to nature's carbohydrates and get off the breads, the cakes, the pastas, the desserty things, and lean into the fruits, the vegetables, the potatoes. Those are fantastic. And the third food change I would make would be, I would really focus on getting the toxins out, the NutraSweets, the artificial ingredients. All of those foods are what we know as obesogens. They block up the insulin receptors, so you want to get those out. If you take those 3 food changes and you start to gradually compress your eating window till you get to this 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating, I have not seen somebody not lose weight that way. That I actually think we will overturn the metabolic mess we're in right now if everybody just did that.
I love that. And when you talked about the oils building up in the system, it reminded me of something from your book that I really loved. The fact that sugar builds up in the system. And this happens primarily in the muscle, in the liver, and in the fat. So talk about how over time, somebody who's not aware and they're eating a standard American diet, they're gonna become this vessel for sugar, and then how that can turn around when they begin fasting. I've heard Jason Fung talk about this previously on the show, and you're the only other person I've heard talk about it this way, and I just find it really helpful for me, and I'm sure other people.
Yeah. I think fasting for me is there's a rhythm to it, whether you're a man or a woman, and it should become enjoyable building a fasting lifestyle. When we look at the nutrition world, we have a lot of rigidity with it, and we have a lot of like have tos, and it becomes this burden we carry when we're like, oh, I guess I'm gonna have to start to make some food changes. But what we want to look at is when we look at ourselves in the mirror and we see fat and we villainize it and we tell ourselves why can't we succeed at a diet when everybody else is succeeding? What I want to start to answer this question with that's so important to me is that we stop saying bad things to us in the mirror and villainizing all of that fat, because your intelligent body was so smart that it said, we have all this extra glucose. We've got insulin that's not able to push the glucose into the cells. So we have to store this excess somewhere. So I have a choice. But this is literally what your body's doing. I have a choice. I could store it in the organs, but that's going to hurt our survival, or I can store it as fat. And if I store it as fat, it won't hurt our survival as deep. And this is why when you look in that mirror, you got to thank that fat. And you got to be like, okay, all that fat is I stored something there, and now I want to unstore it. Now I want it to come out of storage. And that's what fasting does, is it tells your body, hey, glucose isn't coming in, blood sugar's going down, ketones are going up. Why don't you go find what you stored years ago? And while you're finding that and burning it and burning fat, I'm not going to raise glucose so that can happen. So that to me is the magic of what's going on for fat burning when you go into these fasted states. But I want to say one other thing about glucose and sugar that's so detrimental, especially to aging. There's a process called glycation. And glycation is where all that excess glucose that has nowhere to go, it can't be pushed into the cell because you're insulin resistant, gets glommed onto the red blood cell. And the red blood cell's job is to carry oxygen through the body. And if you create this glycation, you create this gumming of these glucose molecules on that red blood cell, what's now going to happen is you're going to get less oxygen to every part of your body, including your brain. What that means long-term is you're going to age faster, Alzheimer's, dementia, memory loss, you're more prone to diabetes. And how you know if you've got this glycation going on is you look at hemoglobin A1C. Is it under 5? If it's under 5, you're not in a glycated state. If it's over 5, you've got some glycation going on. So it's multifaceted, but the body has to adapt to that extra sugar. And those are the two major adaptations.
Great explanation there.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I want to come back to the weight loss piece. For somebody that is trying to lose weight, we got into a lot of great stuff there, but is there any fat burning after somebody breaks the fast? So we know that if we stop eating dinner, we're going to go into a fasted state until we decide to eat the next day. So we can skip breakfast, we can stay in fat burning. But what if we have lunch? Do we ever get a chance to burn fat again until we fast after dinner and have enough time to really get into that fasted state?
Well, this is a great question. This is best explained by looking at metabolic switching. And I will tell you what I'm seeing recently that has really blown me away is that once you get somebody fat adapted, so fat adapted means you eat a meal, your blood sugar goes up, your body uses that glucose for energy. Within a couple of hours, the blood sugar starts to go down and you start to switch over into ketosis. What we're seeing is people are switching over into fat adaptation faster and faster and faster. The more they fast, the more they go in and out with these fasts. So because of that, you've trained, it's like training a dog. You've trained the dog that, okay, when blood sugar goes down, you make ketones. And we're seeing that people go in and out of ketosis, even in their eating window more and more and more because they're fat adapted. So the first trick is to get yourself to understand what ketosis feels like, to understand what it feels like to be in this fat burning stage. The second trick is to start practicing in and out of fasting. So we've talked a lot about that. The third piece, after you've done that for some time, is you'll see it's hard to keep yourself out of ketosis. And to answer your question, that's where we see people keep weight off for good, because their body always wants to go back to ketosis and it's always burning fat, even though they just ate a meal 2 hours ago. So that would be one thing. The second thing is food is not the enemy here. If you eat the right food, it's nourishing your body, which is priming every single metabolic marker in your body and making it easier to go in and out of this metabolic switching. And then it's all about blood sugar management. I've put CGMs on before and I thought, could I go like a week where I don't really have my blood sugar spike? And I can, and it looks like a lot of meat and a lot of fat. And then adding that to my fasting window. So it's when we start to go into the carbs that we're going to get more of an elevation of blood sugar and pulling us out of ketosis. So you could, like carnivore fasting, we did this in my community where people just ate meat and they fasted 17 hours and they did that for 5 days. And literally that was the most weight loss that we ever saw our community lose in that period of time. And largely because, carnivore is a form of keto. And yet people were eating steaks and getting great results. So those are some nuances.
We talked about carnivore and we talked about the fasting piece, which ties in. You mentioned there when we were talking about carnivore, the plant toxins, and the fact that there are certain things that are in plants that are classically known to be healthy, whether it be, kale or spinach, a lot of different plants. How do we know if we're somebody that needs to be wary of those? And then what are the big ones that we want to look out for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing is, I just want everybody, both men and women, to think about when you eat a meal, you should be energized afterwards. If you're not energized after a meal, if you don't have more mental clarity, if something changed adversely in your body from that meal, then I want you to go back and look at that meal and go, what was in that didn't work for me? A lot of times it's just putting the right combination together of foods, like we don't put enough protein with every meal. We don't put enough fat with every meal. So it could be as simple as that. Now, to your question, when we're looking at oxalates and lectins, and I talked to Stephen Gundry about this, and I know you've probably had him on your show, and it is like when you write a book, you have to stay very clear and in one lane. And then there's nuance that needs to be discussed. And that's what Stephen said is, if you have a healthy gut, you're most likely okay with these oxalates and lectins every once in a while. You're not going to have a problem with it. But if you have an unhealthy gut, you've been on multiple rounds of antibiotics, you've been on a woman who's been on birth control for many years, steroid use, all of that is what can change the inner lining of the gut. And then when you eat an oxalate or a lectin, you're going to notice bloating. That's a big one. You're going to be constipated. That's another one. Or you're going to be exhausted. If one of those three things are happening when you eat a salad, then you've got to avoid those oxalates and lectins for a short period of time to balance the system out. Now, to your question of which one's the worst, this is where, we got kale, right? Like, why is kale, like, everybody villainizing kale? Well, think about when you wash kale, the water beads, like, they don't soak in. They, like, stay on the outside. It's like it's waterproof. Well, what is that film on the outside of a kale leaf? And that is packed with oxalates and lectins. So if you eat kale and you get bloated, you should avoid kale. And same thing with some of the other ones, like spinach. Almonds are a big one that we see in the keto movement. A lot of people are doing nuts, but raw almonds can be, or almonds in general can be an issue. But then if you do sprouted almonds, you have some enzymes in there to help you break it down. So, I think the best thing, because I know everybody wants the absolute, but what I'm trying to teach is a personalized nutritional approach. So can you just look at how you're reacting to your food? And if you're reacting with bloating, constipation, low energy, brain fog, something in that meal didn't work.
Okay, well, let's take a step back from there and say you are somebody who is reacting to those foods, or you're unsure and you want to get back to baseline and rebuild the gut. Other than removing those foods, what's step one to rebuilding the gut?
Honestly, and I know I'm like the poster child for fasting, but I just have seen so many people heal, is you want to go into those longer fasts. 1 day a week, throw a 24-hour fast in. When I did that in my clinic, I literally took all the supplements that I had ever given anybody for any kind of gut dysbiosis, and we stopped prescribing those. We stopped recommending them, because we found one 24-hour fast was enough. If you could do it every week, it was enough to start to change the terrain inside the gut, get rid of the bad bacteria, and create an environment where the good bacteria could grow. Now, if you pair that post-fast with 3 different types of foods, the polyphenol, the probiotic, and the prebiotic foods, what you've done in 1 day is that you have changed the terrain inside your gut. You have gotten rid of the bad, and then you come in and you feed the good. You do 1 day a week like that, and your microbiome will start to change. I've seen it work for thousands of people. So to me, that's your go-to over a supplement.
Okay, let me just highlight what you said there. So we want to remove the plants that are causing the damage, take 24 hours and fast, and then replenish the gut after that with prebiotics, probiotics, and polyphenols.
That's right. And some really good ones that are low in oxalates are like olives, dark chocolate, even sauerkraut. Like every person I've ever talked to about the oxalate lectin issue says when you ferment a vegetable, you get rid of those toxins in the vegetable. So like a classic meal that I'll have post 24-hour fast is avocado, because I love it. And then I will put a cup of sauerkraut. I've got some golden sauerkraut that I love. It's got some turmeric in it. Put that in there. And then I'll put some chia seeds and hemp seeds in it. And I just look at it like I'm feeding the gut bacteria that I just created this environment. And now I'm feeding it what it might need to be able to let those good guys grow.
So when it comes to probiotics, the obvious question is fermented foods versus a probiotic capsule. We now know you're a fan of the sauerkraut and the probiotic food. Yeah. Is a probiotic supplement something you'd layer on top of that?
You could. Now, here's the thing I want to think about with the microbiome. What I do with my fermented food is I try to get as big of a variety as I can. So I've got fermented yogurts, some that come from cow yogurt. I've got cocoa yo is one of my favorite. It's coconut yogurt that's fermented. I love doing raw kefir, so I'll do that. If you came into my refrigerator right now, you'd see about 15 different jars of sauerkraut, and they all are different fermented vegetables. The reason that I do that is because I'm looking for this, increasing the diversity of my gut. So we have about 7,000 different species of bacteria in our gut. And if we eat the same foods over and over again, or we take the same probiotic over and over again, we create a monoculture where we're allowing a certain, even though they're good, we're allowing a certain set of bacteria to become strong and leaving out the other bacteria. So, when you look at a probiotic, the best probiotic on the planet maybe has 100 billion CFUs in it, and maybe at the best, like 100 different strains of bacteria. But you have 7,000 different strains. So if you end up taking the same probiotic over and over and over again, you're now creating this monoculture. The name of the game with the microbiome is diversity. Diversity of sauerkrauts, diversity of vegetables, diversity of meats. Like, stop eating the same foods over and over again. When I go to a restaurant, I have one rule. What do I not normally eat? That is the first thing that I look at on the menu. I don't think, oh, what does my taste buds want? I think, what do my microbes want? Because I'm, like last night, I had salmon. I went out to eat. I had salmon. I hadn't had salmon in like weeks. But at home, I have grass-fed steak all the time. And then one of the other options was lamb. I had just had lamb the week before. So we got to think bigger when it comes to the microbes. They want more diversification is what they're looking for in our food sources. And if we do that, there's not a need for a probiotic. The only time I come in with a probiotic is if somebody had been on steroids or somebody had to go on antibiotics, and we just need a little extra help to replenish that.
As you were talking about the diversity of food, I couldn't help but notice you mentioned different meats in there. And usually when people are talking about eating diversity and feeding the gut microbiome, they're talking about different plants and eating the rainbow. How does different meats impact the microbiome?
Well, they have amino acids in it, and amino acids are a fuel to the microbes. So yes, fiber is a huge piece that of fuel source that you need. But this amino acid profile is really, really important because we've got a little bit in our world right now of plant-based carnivore sort of arguing. And I'm like, it's all good. It is all good. Just open it up and diversify it and understand these principles we're talking about. But when we look at meat, you've got amino acids, and amino acids are the best in meat. You can't find as many of them in plants. So, and those amino acids are going to feed certain bacteria that the plants can't feed.
I've never heard anybody talk about it that way. That's fascinating.
Yeah. That's the major thing is that and then now let's take it one step further. What do your microbes make? Well, they make like one of the greatest neurotransmitters on the planet, serotonin, that keeps you happy and feeling good. So I need plants to be able to feed those microbes that make serotonin, but I also need foods that are high in like tyrosine and tryptophan to be able to feed those microbes as well. So we got to go back to a more complete diet, not looking at, and this is my problem with both carnivore and vegan, is we get really rigid in the amount of foods that we eat. And I'm just saying, let's open it all up and the microbes will be happy.
As we navigate through this conversation, we're getting a good idea of what your diet looks like. I noticed when you're talking about fermented foods, you mentioned, I think it was cow dairy yogurt. Talk about, because that's a controversial one. A lot of people, don't have cow dairy, or if they do, it's fermented like in your case. Talk about how you factor that in and why that's a food you include.
It's such a good question. So here's how I can explain it. The best milk source for the human body is your mother's milk. And if you look at the molecule size of human mother's milk, and I know this is a podcast, you'll have to go to YouTube to see this, but it's like a moderate molecule size. When we look at cow's milk, it's huge. It's like 10 times the molecule size of mother's milk. And when we look at something like goat and sheep, it's a little more similar to our mother's milk molecule size, which is why a lot of people can do goat, they can do sheep, so that our digestive systems can break that down easier because they were built to break down mother's milk. They weren't built to break down a lactose molecule that's 10 times bigger than human mother's milk. But there's a workaround. And that is if we don't do pasteurized dairy, cow's dairy. When we are doing the raw dairy, you have left the probiotic piece in there and you have left the enzymes in there. And the enzymes are critical for helping you break down this large molecule size. So I'm not a fan of, even if it's grass-fed pasteurized dairy, that's not, some people aren't going to be able to handle that. That's not a great source for your gut microbiome. But now if you do raw, you're bringing in the probiotics, you're bringing in the enzymes, and you're able to handle that molecule size better and get the benefit of those two components of raw dairy that can really heal the gut. It's like the fat conversation. Pasteurized and raw dairy are not the same animal, even though we call it dairy and it comes from a cow. It's the same thing with fat. We say fat, but there's good fat and the bad fat. Carbs, there's man-made, there's processed. It's what we're doing to this food that is destroying our microbiome. So just let it be in its most natural state.
It's all very nuanced. And that's why the long-form conversation is so important, to get into the weeds on a lot of this.
Yeah, agreed.
So we know lectins and oxalates. We talked about how, depending where you're at along the health spectrum, you need to be wary of including those. What other foods do we need to be wary of when it comes to our gut health? Things that can disrupt that.
Yeah. Well, gluten, I don't know, a lot of people say, well, I can handle gluten. Yeah, over time, eventually that's going to catch up with you. And the biggest challenge that we have with gluten is that it's how they make it, how they process it. And I don't know if you've had this conversation on your podcast before, but there's two major problems with gluten. One is glyphosate. So, it is damaging the microbes. It's also damaging our brain. It is a systemic inflammatory pesticide. It's an endocrine disruptor. There's nothing good about glyphosate. So there's that. But when we're talking about the microbes, we have to remember that the type of wheat that's being grown, at least here in America, has a special hybrid of wheat, and it has a component in it called Bt toxin. And this Bt toxin was bred into this new style of wheat, so that if a bug came and tried to eat the wheat, the bug would literally die. That's the purpose of having Bt toxin bred into the new form of wheat. Well, what's your microbiome made up of? It's made up of bugs. So if you are eating, even if it's organic, gluten or wheat, there's gluten in a lot of things, what's happening is you're destroying your microbiome. Now, you might not be noticing it as constipation or bloating. You might be noticing it as brain fog. You might be noticing it as depression. You might be noticing it as aches and pains. I have yet to see anybody do well on a gluten diet or having gluten in their diet. There are some workarounds. So we're hearing a lot more about sprouted and ancient grains. So when we hear about the sprouted, now you're bringing an enzyme back in to help break it down so it's not just a toxic bomb to the gut. When we're dealing with an ancient grain, a lot of those don't have that Bt toxin in it because it's an ancient version of wheat that we used to have. I was born in 1969. In the 70s, nobody had a peanut allergy. Nobody had a wheat problem because we didn't have this Bt toxin and we didn't have glyphosate at this time. If I go to Europe, I'll eat wheat because they, typically especially in France and Italy, the laws around the type of wheat, the respect for this ancient style of wheat is much bigger. So I think gluten is a real big challenge that most people should take out.
Okay, so we got gluten, we got lectins, we got oxalates. What else is disrupting the gut?
Well, and then we've got our chemicals for sure. So, read your labels because any synthetic chemical, and this is your red dyes, this is your nitrates, this is, any chemical that you can't pronounce in a label is going to damage the gut. interesting enough, it probably falls down on a lower tier because gluten and lectins are definitely becoming more of an insult to the microbiome. But you got to look at your chemical load, and then we're back at fats again. These highly processed inflammatory fats are like, I like to think of it like you have these little pets inside your gut. And they're there. They want to make you happy. They want to like give you energy and pull nutrients out of your food and make you neurotransmitters and support your immune system. And then you go and you decide you're going to have a hamburger with commercial meat and a bun with gluten and a bunch of fries. And you have just like destroyed these microbes. You've like decimated them like it's a big bomb that goes in there. And you might be a little sleepy, you might not notice a big difference from it, but you've totally wiped out these little pets inside your gut that are going to do everything you want in life and everything you want in your health. So the toxic oils, the gluten, the oxalates and lectins, if you've got that issue, the synthetic chemicals, it's the Western diet. It's everything it's like just avoid the Western diet and start eating things without a label.
We talked about probiotics and your thoughts on those when it came to gut health. Let's expand beyond gut health and talk about supplements in general and things you'd recommend to people to at least consider.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the first thing about supplements, just so we're clear on my philosophy, is I look at a supplement as exactly what the word says. It's a supplement to a good, healthy diet and good lifestyle. So I cycle supplements. You will never find me on the same supplement over and over and over again. And this is what I've done with my patients for years. Like you go in, like if you have to use a probiotic, I think like a probiotic is great post-antibiotic. If you have to use an antibiotic, go in with a probiotic for 30 to 90 days and then eat the way we're talking about. So for starters, we need to pulse it. Second, I really can't say enough about making sure that you understand the toxins that are in your supplements, lead being a huge one. And this is where it's really sneaky. Like, how do you know if there's lead or some kind of chemical in your supplement? Well, follow your brands. Like I have some very specific brands that I've seen how they have built, have made their supplements. I know their supplements are food-based and they're grown from food. And I've like a couple of these brands, I've actually been in their warehouse and seen that they test for different levels of heavy metals. So we got to know what the regulation is around toxicity. Cheaper when it comes to supplements is not better. In fact, in some cases, you might actually be doing more harm than good. So we want to cycle in and out of them. We want to make sure they're clean. And then the last part, and this one really blows me away, is how many people take a supplement for years. And I'll ask them, how's it working for you? And they're like, oh, I don't know. How would I measure it? Well, you should see a change. And you either need to see a change on a blood test or you need to feel the change. If you don't, it's probably not working for you. Vitamin D is a great example. Just because you take vitamin D doesn't mean you're absorbing vitamin D. So if you're trying to build your vitamin D levels up, which we all should be focused on, are you testing that on a monthly basis? It's an easy test to do. You can do it on yourself. You can go to your own lab now. Blood tests have become easier and easier. So are you seeing that measurement improve? If not, you may be on the wrong vitamin D and you got to switch up the source. So those are my three major issues that I think we have to think about because we're a little supplement crazy. We've gone from, I don't want to take a medication but I'll take a supplement.
Well, I think there's something about it where it's tangible. We feel like we're really doing something. And to be honest, if you have the financial means, it is one of the easier things to do if you're looking to take healthy steps in the right direction. So you gave us a little tidbit there. You mentioned vitamin D, but we know none of these supplements go without testing to make sure that, we're within that range we want to be. And we're cycling constantly. But what other supplements will we want to consider?
Oh, it's a great question. So this kind of ties into what I mentioned before. So there's a couple like standard ones that I think everybody should think about. For starters, and I don't have any invested, just so we're really clear, like I have no financial investment in this product. I just really love it. And I love the human behind it. And that's Ion Biome. I think they're called Nature of Intelligence or Intelligence of Nature now. They keep switching their name. But what Zach Bush did in that supplement is he found a bacteria that was in low level layers of dirt that we're not getting access to anymore that heals a leaky gut. And I have seen miracles with that supplement. It's one of the rare few that I think everybody should be on. I think vitamin D, again, I think everybody should be checking their vitamin D levels on a regular basis. I think when we look at an omega supplement, we really need to get out of this, oh my gosh, I'm going to power up on omega-3, because you really need a balance of omega-3, 6, and 9. And so if you've cleaned up your diet and you've brought down your omega-6s and you up your omega-3s through supplementation, even if it's a clean supplementation, you actually have put yourself in an inflammatory response now. So I like a couple of supplements that I use. Pure Form is one, Vista 1 and 2 from Systemic Formulas. They have 3, 6, 9 all in a balance. So it's, and this is why working with a practitioner, understanding this as opposed to just saying, oh, I guess I need omega-3 and popping onto Amazon. And all of a sudden, you just buy the cleanest supplement or the supplement you think is going to work. I think we really need to understand what it's doing and how toxic is it, and what's my exit strategy with that supplement. I think that is where we go and we can really change that look. But outside of that, I think there's some great like organ meats. I don't know, Jesse, if you're an organ meat supplement fan.
Through supplements, yes.
Yes. So I know I'm not going to eat liver all the time. So I probably need to make sure that I get it in some kind of supplementation, because I do get that it's important. People who don't methylate well, we know that there's certain versions of B12 that they can lean in to help them methylate better. So, you can kind of go off a personalization after that.
Mindy, intermittent fasting is a term that's thrown around a lot in the health and wellness space these days. It's gained a lot of momentum, but for people who are tuning in, who are on the fence, maybe they've heard of the term, they've thought about diving in. Let's get into some of the benefits to maybe give them that nudge they need to embrace this practice.
The first thing I'm thinking is, why are people on the fence? Come on now. I have a lot of excitement about what intermittent fasting in general can do for the human body. So my first thought really was like, people are on the fence? Everybody should be embracing this. So if you are on the fence, let me take you off the fence. I think the easiest way to look at this is to understand that fasting is in our human design. We literally thrive with fasting. And if you go back to the caveman days, the cavewoman days, and you think about what happened in that moment, we didn't have a refrigerator. We didn't have a pantry. They didn't wake up in the morning and come out of the cave and be able to DoorDash coffee and breakfast to them. They had to go search for food. And a part of that ability to go search for food and have the mental clarity and the energy to be able to search for food, we had to dip into an alternate fuel source. And this alternate fuel source is called the ketogenic energy system. I like to call it the fat burner system, but basically when you go without food, you start to switch over into this fat burning place and you make a substrate called ketones. And it is in that initial production of ketones that supercharges your brain, speeds up healing, has you burning fat like you've never seen before, will fuel the mitochondria of every cell in your body, because you were primally designed to be able to go be stronger so that you can go hunt for food in the absence of food. So it is literally in our makeup. And when we're not fasting, we're not tapping into this incredible design that we come equipped with.
All right. Well, I think you've convinced at least a few people there. Let's talk about how long it takes of being fasted to get to that point where you become basically superhuman, like you talked about there.
Yeah. Yeah. So this was a big debate when I wrote Fast Like a Girl. The editor that I was working with, we went back and forth on when do people go into the fasted state. And I'll tell you what the literature says, and then I'll tell you what I've seen in our community of hundreds of thousands of people. So you have to remember that when you're eating, you're operating from your sugar burner energy system, or we can call that glucose if you want to look at it in a more scientific level. You need glucose to start to come down and then dip even below your meal amount in order for you to switch over into fat burning. So it takes about 8 hours is what the literature is saying for us to start to see that glucose has come down enough after a meal to start to move you into fat burning. So you're looking at about an 8-hour time period. But that isn't really where the magic starts. At 8 hours, you're now over into fat burning. If you stay in that fasted state going into 12 hours, 13 hours, now we got the supercharged factors kicking in. We are going to see testosterone go up and growth hormones go up. And all of a sudden, your body starts to go into that superhuman state, usually after 12 hours. So 8 will get you there. 12 will start the supercharge moment.
Well, let's really get into the details here. We got 8, we're getting into the supercharged. Let's push it further all the way to the extreme where it becomes unhealthy. I want to talk about the full continuum and what are some of the changes that happen in the body at these different phases.
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's the best way I can explain it. In the book, I lay out 6 different fasts, and they're all based off time. So intermittent fasting, most people know it as 12 to 16 hours in that range somewhere. We know that autophagy starts to kick in somewhere around 17 hours. The autophagy button will be turned on, and the body starts to get rid of old cells and repair the inner workings of the cells that are salvageable. We know at 24 hours, we start to see stem cells that kick in and repair the gut. 36 hours, the body goes into this really accelerated fat burning state. 48 hours, we get the whole dopamine system gets reset. You get new dopamine receptors that are born. And Walter Longo taught us that 72 hours, you could reboot your whole immune system. So with that as a template, as a graph, what we can now say is which one of these fasts is best for me. Because this is a big part of Fast Like a Girl, is that there's, what might work for one person doesn't work for another person. You've got to decide what your intention is with fasting. And I think one of the biggest challenges we've seen in the fasting movement is everybody just dipped in and stopped eating food, started, powering up on bulletproof coffee. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And they just kept going, not looking at setting a very specific intention to the length of their fast. So when I answer where does it go wrong, it goes wrong in a couple of places. One, when we do the same fast over and over again. The classic example of this is 1 meal a day. Jason Fung ignited the 1 meal a dayers, and it's amazing, and we're so grateful for his work. But you got to vary your fast. You shouldn't be doing 1 meal a day all the time. The other place it goes wrong is in women, which is why I wrote a whole book on it, because women, there are times for a woman's hormones where she should be fasting. There's times where she shouldn't be fasting. And then I would say the last place that I see it go wrong, or where we really need some assistance, is if anybody's got some eating disorders, they need to be really coached through that process. This is not something that you want to enter into lightly. Pregnant women should not be fasting. Nursing women should be fasting only to a certain level. These are all things that I map out in Fast Like a Girl.
Yeah, it's a great framework for us to build the rest of this conversation. And you mentioned something there that really hit home for me as I was reading your book. I've been into intermittent fasting for a long period of time now, but basically do the same fast most days where I stop eating after dinner and then usually around lunch, I'll break that fast. So I'm
Yeah.
doing whatever that would be. It varies day to day, but that's the general trend. And what I
Yes.
want to get into here, and I'm excited about for myself and for the listeners, which isn't often talked about as much, is the fact that you can, again, for the right person at the right time, push it beyond that and gain these other benefits from doing some longer fasts.
Yeah.
So, what I want to talk about first, you mentioned autophagy there. Talk about when that kicks in and what that looks like.
Yeah. Oh God. Do you have 10 hours? This is a highly debated topic on all my socials because the research that I've seen is usually around 17 hours. Think of autophagy as a dimmer switch. So you start to turn the autophagy light on. It starts around 17 hours and it will peak at 72 hours. So somewhere between 17 and 72 hours, you have triggered autophagy. Now, autophagy, the best way to look at it is it's like you turn on an intelligence inside the cell. And that intelligence looks around the cell and says, okay, we've got some toxins inside this cell. We've got some bacteria and viruses inside this cell. We've got some cellular parts that aren't working well, and no food or nutrients are coming into the cell. So we better clean up our act. So that cell starts to repair itself. Now, in that moment, what the cell might decide is, wait a second, this cell is so bad that we need to kill it. It's a process called apoptosis. We need to get rid of it so it doesn't go rogue and form more disease. Remember that the whole premise of your body is it's built for survival. So when you stimulate autophagy, the survival instinct of the cells kicks in. And if there are cells that are going to hold back survival, they're going to get rid of them. If there are parts that need to be repaired, the intelligence is going to repair it. And this to me is the most beautiful part of fasting is you can access this repair without spending a dime, doesn't take any money. It is truly a gift that your intelligence has for you if you're willing to go into those longer hours.
And you mentioned there's 17 hours being how long we need to fast to get to that point. Roughly, it's a dimmer switch, which is a great analogy. But for somebody who hasn't fasted to that point, which is probably a lot of people tuning into the show, is there other ways of getting there? Because obviously this sounds like something we all need and want to, clean up dead cells and parts within cells. Are there other things people might be doing outside of fasting that has a similar effect?
Oh, for autophagy, to stimulate
Yes.
autophagy? Oh, yeah. I mean, so here's the thing. Autophagy has become this kind of buzzword, and I love it. It's exciting that people are grabbing it. There are a lot of ways. Red light stimulates autophagy. Cold plunges are stimulating autophagy. HIIT workouts stimulate autophagy. You were already stimulating autophagy when you sleep every night. The autophagy gets stimulated. All of these are great. We have supplement and nutrients that can stimulate autophagy. I get a lot of people ask me about spermidine and nutrients like that. They're all great. But the greatest autophagy stimulator is fasting. So those can all be wonderful. And fasting is really number one for stimulating autophagy.
Let's talk more about the supplement piece. I want to pause here and get into some of the nuances.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to supplements, you mentioned spermidine. This is something that's come up on the show before. Is this something you use and advocate for? And then let's talk about other supplements during that fasting period we can use to ramp things up.
Yeah. I don't normally, here's the thing. We would rather take the supplement and get an enhanced experience than go through the work. And everything that I'm teaching the world is I'm trying to teach us a lifestyle that taps into this intelligence. So I always want us to start with lifestyle first. I also have a strong belief that if we're going to overturn metabolic disease and metabolic syndrome in the world, we've got to have some free resources, and fasting is that free resource. So I would encourage people to learn to train themselves to get to 17 hours. So that's my first thing. Now, having said that, in the training process, sometimes there can be tools that are helpful. Spermidine is one. We know that spermidine is going to move you into this autophagy state a little quicker. It's like a little boost. It's a little supercharge. We also know coffee can do that. That's why, I'm not telling people to take coffee out of their fasting window, because clean coffee actually can stimulate autophagy. And now you're double stacking. Let's say you go, okay, I'm going to go 17 hours today. I'm going to do a cup of coffee and I'm going to do some spermidine. Now you've supercharged that autophagy effect in the body. So I'm okay with supplements as long as we don't give the supplement the hero identification. You get the hero moment, because it's your body doing the healing, not the supplement. The supplement is exactly that. It is supplementing your ability to get into these incredible states that your body already came pre-programmed with.
For somebody who is, getting to the 17 hours in their fast, cells are dying or they're repairing themselves. Let's talk about the physiology of what's happening specifically when a cell dies. So you've had this cell in your body, it's gone awry. We're pushing it with this stress of fasting. It dies. What happens to that cell in the body?
Ooh, it's such a well-stated question. I've been on a lot of interviews and nobody said it that way. So thank you. That stimulated my neuroscience brain. We call it a senescent cell. So a senescent cell is an aging cell, and it also can be a disease-forming cell. And the longer we live on this planet, the more of these senescent cells we have. So when the body decides to stimulate apoptosis and get rid of it, it has to get it out through all of our detox pathways. So it's going to process it through the liver, depending on where the cellular death is occurring. It's going to process it through the liver, the gut, the kidneys, the skin. All of those places are what we call detox organs. But the most important part of all of detox is not necessarily the organ, it's the lymph system. We've got to be able to have an open lymph system as these cells are dying. So where we have seen problems in our community where somebody says, hey, I've got a rash, or all of a sudden I got diarrhea, or I got constipation, or I've got brain fog. These are all signs that perhaps the body, what it was doing as it got rid of the senescent cells, the pathways were not primed. They were not ready for that. And so all you got to do is take a step back, open up those pathways, and now it'll work really well. And in the new book, I put all of my detox pathway hacks that we've ever seen work well.
Well, let's get into some of them here. People can go into the book and get into the nuances, but for somebody who is going to get to that point and have to ideally make sure our detox system is working correctly, what are some of the things we can do? And does this possibly tie back to the supplement question, certain things we can take when we're pushing it to that point of fasting?
Well, the first thing is binders, activated charcoal, like zeolites. Like if you have a good binder and you're starting to get some of these symptoms, lean on a binder and at that moment. And that works incredibly well. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be, making sure that you are doing some very simple detox things. Like, are you sweating on a regular basis? So you could sweat by going out and working out, or if you have an infrared sauna, get in the infrared sauna and sweat that way. So sweating is going to be a beautiful piece. Then we can go into dry brushing, making sure you're getting all the dead cells off the skin. There are a lot of manual lymph techniques. In our community, we like to really have women, especially, look at the armpit and look underneath the arm. Do you have a puff under there? Or do you have a pit? It should be a pit. If it's a puff, then that's stagnant lymph. I have a lot of the people in our community really focused on right above the collarbones. What's going on in that area? There's a lot of lymph gathering there. Is that swollen and puffy? If so, you're going to want to rub it and move that lymph. Getting massages, those kind of things are also going to make a big difference. So there's a lot you can do, but I would say my first go-to is binders. Like, bind it up so that you can get it out of your body first, and then let's look at how to open those pathways up. Another really good, easy one is that I think is castor oil, and really rubbing some castor oil on your liver, opening that up. You could do a castor oil pack. So everybody's going to have a little different trick that's going to work. And for some people, one trick will work. And for others, they're going to have to do 5 to 10 tricks to open all that up.
Let's come back to the coffee piece. A lot of people are drinking coffee. You mentioned healthy coffee. I think that's a really important caveat to this, organic and pesticide free. But let's take it even further and talk about other beverages or maybe even foods, things that we can have during the fasted state that technically don't break the fast.
Yeah. So this is a great conversation. So believe it or not, have you ever heard of the term fasted snack? There's actually such a thing.
In your book, yes.
Yeah. So I found this in the research that I've done on fasting. I found this study that showed when people had a fasted snack, it allowed them to fast a little bit longer. So let's say they were going to go 13 hours. They have a fasted snack. Now they can go 15 hours and they're getting the same metabolic benefit as if they never had that fasted snack. And the requirements of the fasted snack are a pure fat bomb. Like it's all fat. So finding a pure fat bomb can be difficult. So, we tell people to lean into something like a little bit of an avocado. You can do a little bit of nut butter. You could do a scoop of nut butter. Some people do a little bit of bone broth. Some people do, a little bit of MCT oil on a spoon and just drink it. So there are fasted snacks like that. But what most people do is their coffee. And I think this is a really good tool. Dave Asprey and I have had numerous conversations about this. He's a believer of like adding probiotics into that and prebiotic fibers to feed your microbes, putting a lot of butter and MCT oil in clean coffee. He strongly feels will help you elongate that fasting window. And I would say there's some truth to that. You definitely want to get out of this idea that there's an absolute for everybody, because what we've seen with coffee is that coffee may really help one person elongate their fast, and it may actually break the fast for another person. So how that is determined is really by your microbiome. Your microbiome is those bacteria in your gut are gonna be the regulators of blood sugar when that coffee hits it. And we all have unique microbiomes. So we really want to make sure that we test our own blood sugar. And do you know that test?
What test are you talking about? A CGM or?
No, checking your own blood sugar pre and post coffee to see if coffee works for you. I didn't want to repeat it if
it's not something I've done before. I've worn a CGM and watched my blood glucose over a period of time. But are you talking about like a classic finger prick?
Yeah, so you can do a CGM, you can do a finger prick, but this is the test to see if coffee works for you. Is that you take a blood sugar reading, and then you drink your cup of coffee. Half hour later, take another blood sugar reading. You can do it on a pinprick, you can do it on a CGM, totally up to you. And what you're looking for is those two numbers to be almost exactly the same. The second number should be very similar to that first number. If for some reason the second number after the cup of coffee, it drops, the blood sugar drops, that's okay, because that might have moved you more into the fasted state. It's if it elevates. And then the question becomes, well, how much elevation takes you out of a fasted state? And I say anything over a 5-point difference of blood sugar elevation has now taken you out of the fasted state. So for example, if your blood sugar is 100 before the cup of coffee, and then a half an hour later, it's 110 after the cup of coffee, it's pulled you out of a fasted state.
That's so interesting. And from your estimation and working with people, how many people would this affect?
I wish we had numbers on that, but I would say it's more than you would think. And I can only say based off of myself, because your microbes are always changing. Your microbiome is always adapting to your environment. So one of the things that I've noticed is sometimes coffee doesn't pull me out of a fasted state, and sometimes it does. And it's all based off of those little super microbes in our gut. They're determining it. So I would say it's more common than you would think. It really goes to, what are you trying to do with your fast? Some people are purists and they're like, okay, I'm not going to do coffee. And other people are like, I want to make this a lifestyle. It's super helpful. So I've got to find a rhythm with it that's going to work for me so that I can fast a little longer.
Mindy, at this point, I think it'd be interesting to hear what you do during a fast. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm my mind works the best in the morning. So I'm a get up early, get as much accomplished before noon kind of gal. And so I find food slows me down. And so I like to stay in that fasted state largely in the morning, and then I eat my dinner I try to get it done around the sunset. And we can talk about why I time dinner according to light in a moment if you want. So I do like to drink different things in my fasted window. And coffee, I do coffee. I've been doing less of it. And largely just to see how it reacts to my hormones and see if there's any shift I can see in my hormones. I've been throwing in some mushroom coffee lately, mixing it in with my clean coffee. And I really like that. I'll throw some raw cream and a little MCT oil into a mug that's got mushroom coffee, a little splash of clean coffee, and some hot water and MCT oil. And that is most of the time, that is my morning routine. And then about 10, I'll reach for a glass, like I have it here. I've got a glass of aminos. So I'll put some powdered aminos in a glass of water. And aminos are great for everything, hormones, neurotransmitters. And I find that it helps me stay in a fasted state longer. And then about noon, and sometimes I'll throw some exogenous ketones in if I'm wanting to supercharge my brain. And then around noon, I decide, am I going to break my fast or not? And there are 3 things I recommend people break their fast with. And one of them is fat. I can go into a big cup of bone broth. I could do the fasted snack routine. And sometimes that'll carry me all the way till 4:00 when I'll dive into a bigger meal. Other times I'll break my fast with protein. If I just finished working out and I want to really power up my muscles, then I will break my fast with protein. So that's kind of like a morning. I'm always drinking something, maybe hacking something with a supplement like aminos, and it really seems to work for me.
Let's come to the daylight piece then. You mentioned timing your dinner with daylight. What time do you eat and why do you do it that way?
Okay, so here's what I think is a really big thing everybody should know. When the sun goes down, melatonin goes up. We know this. But when melatonin goes up, you become more insulin resistant. So the sooner you can eat a meal or before sunset or around sunset, before melatonin makes her debut, you are going to process from an insulin sensitivity level. You're going to process that meal much more effectively. So I try to get that meal in around sunset. Now it's, where it is by me right now, it's wintertime. It's getting dark around 6:00. So I'm working to get my meal in around 5. And it's purely from that insulin sensitivity standpoint. Now, I want to point out, if you are listening to this, I really want to say that I've worked with a lot of families where they're like, well, I don't come home from soccer practice with the kids until 8:00 at night. The whole goal of fasting is to make it fit your lifestyle. So if you hear that and you're like, there's no way I can finish eating dinner by 5, 6:00, then just build your fasting lifestyle around what works best for you.
And when you talked about breaking your fast, I think you mentioned having fat. What are some of the other options for people that have been pushing it, even a typical intermittent fast, or when they start pushing it longer? What are your recommendations for safely breaking that?
Well, if you go longer than if you go to 3 days, even if you go to 2 days of fasting, you want to really be methodical about how you break it. And I have a 4-step approach to breaking a fast that I recommend works really well. And it starts with doing some bone broth. I think bone broth on the longer fast is amazing to break your fast with because it has glycine in it and it'll really repair any leaky gut situation. So I have people start with bone broth. If you're a vegetarian, you can do like a vegetable broth. Then if you're feeling good at that point, you can move into some prebiotic or probiotic foods. One of my favorite is I'll do a combo of like avocado with some sauerkraut on it, and then throw a little bit of hemp seeds and maybe some chia seeds on it to get that prebiotic piece in there. So you really want to think about your microbes next. Then I'll have people test it with steamed vegetables. And if all is well after that, you can go into meat. So that's for the longer fast. For the shorter fasts, again, we're back at like, what is it that you're trying to do? I'm a big fan these days of people breaking the shorter fast with protein. And let me tell you why. When we stimulate autophagy, we turn off something called mTOR. And mTOR is the growth part of our body, and it's what grows muscles. And muscles, I am 1,000% behind this idea that muscle is your organ of longevity. You also have to remember that muscles, the more muscle you have, the more insulin receptor sites you have. So you're going to be able to take in glucose in a deeper way if you have more insulin openings, more of these gates within the muscle. But here's the trick. To stimulate mTOR, you got to get at least 30 grams of protein at that first meal. So it triggers an amino acid receptor. It stimulates mTOR in a positive way. So I'm a big fan of protein. In the book, I map out 3 different things, but I would say right now, protein's my favorite for the shorter fasts. For the longer fasts, definitely follow that protocol that I gave.
You mentioned 30 grams of protein. Just to give us a ballpark idea, what would that look like?
Well, eggs are some of my favorite. Eggs have so much in them, but you would have to do about 6 eggs to get 30 grams of protein. So if, I know this is a podcast, so it's hard to see, but you're looking at about I think recently I saw it was like a 6 or 7 ounce steak. That, you look at whatever, if you're eating chicken, you're eating steak, just Google how many ounces is 30 grams, but you're looking at about a 7 ounce steak.
We've gotten into a lot of the nuances of intermittent fasting. I'm curious, Mindy, how did you first stumble upon it? Where was this along your health journey, and what brought you in?
Yeah, that also is a good question. I actually went searching for my perimenopausal answers at 43. I was the classic person who at 40 was like exercising like long hours. Like Sunday mornings were a 2-hour run with my friends. I was eating all day. I think I might have been paleo at the time. I was taking a ton of supplements. Everything I could possibly do for my health, I felt like I was doing. And that was at 40. By 43, I hadn't changed anything. And all of a sudden I started getting hot flashes. I started having trouble sleeping. I started having some mood challenges, energy challenges, and I started gaining weight for no particular reason. And so that's when I discovered Dr. Osumi at the time had just been recognized for and given the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology for this concept of autophagy. So I dove into what it was, and that led me, down rabbit holes of research. And what I found at 43, so that was 10 years ago, I'm 53 now. What I found was that fasting became this tool that not only helped me get my weight back on track, not only helped my hot flashes, not only helped sleep, but supercharged my brain in a way that I had never experienced in my entire life. And so I'm just the type of person that when I love something, I can't shut up about it. It's a little bit of a challenge if you live in my close sphere. And I just brought it to the world and started teaching people on YouTube how to fast. And like within a month period, my YouTube channel blew up with stories of people saying, I'm fasting. This is working. This is incredible. And here we are, I think we're at like 30 million views later on that channel. The stories keep pouring in about how incredibly effective it is. So that was my door in.
That is incredible. And you mentioned the mental aspect quickly there, how it just lit your brain up and you were thinking clearer. Talk more about that before and after, and what it was like being able to access parts of your brain that were dormant before.
Yeah. You know what I did the 3:00 crash. Like I was the person who at 3:00, I couldn't think straight. I was tired. I was in practice at the time, and we would have a morning shift and an afternoon shift with a big lunch break. So prior to fasting, I would come home and I would have to take a nap. And then I would drag my body into my clinic. And then I would see a whole slew of patients in the afternoon. And focus was a challenge. Energy was a challenge. I was sleepy all the time. That literally changed in the first 2 weeks of fasting. Like, that was insane. I would say the second thing that changed for me was just the overall cognition, the ability to hold on to information. So what we now know about fasting is that it not only repairs decaying neurons in the brain, but that it can actually upregulate BDNF, which is think of it like miracle grow for your brain, and it will actually start to grow you new neurons. So in the 10 years I've been applying this fasting lifestyle, I strongly feel like, I hold on to information better than I ever did in my entire life. And I don't think most 53-year-olds are saying that. This is a time when we start worrying about dementia and Alzheimer's, and my brain is better neuronally equipped than ever because of a decade of fasting.
And I think another layer to this too is knowing what is actually replenishing as a woman or as a man who wants to do self-care, because a lot of these biohacks in the health and wellness space, whether it be to go in the sauna, go into an ice bath, go to a spin class, whatever people are doing as self-care, if they're in a position of that cycle as a woman who's cycling, or just a man or woman who's at any point in their life who is burnt out, and they're using these things as a way to replenish, they may be further layering on to the stress that while they're thinking they're doing something good for their body, they're actually depleting. So we need to redefine what self-care is and what's actually replenishing to the body.
Oh my God, this is such a good point. Thank you for stating this, because I'm watching all these people jump into cold plunges. And the first thing I thought was like, how should a woman do that? Because there's a cortisol response when you jump into a cold plunge. So I would say just don't do it the week before your period. Like, that would be a simple hack. Whereas a sauna, like an infrared sauna, actually nourishes the parasympathetic. So it would be actually a really good thing to do the week before your period. So I think that the next evolution for the biohacking movement is to start to look at these things we deem as healthy and helpful to the body, and let's make sure we're clear on where they fit in this ebb and flow of the menstrual cycle. And it's really, it's one of the things that I see that I do not like in the biohacking movement is that we just say, this is amazing, this is the science, and then we leave women's hormonal ebbs and flows out of that conversation.
Well, let's further elaborate. You mentioned the sauna being parasympathetic. What are some of the other things that somebody tuning in right now who wants to have more of that balance in their life, what are some things that they can do that actually calm the system?
Yeah. Well, infrared saunas are my favorite. You really prime the parasympathetic nervous system. And let's talk about that system for a moment, because I believe that one of the reasons that fasting has worked so well is it's primed this metabolic switch where you can go from sugar burner to fat burner. And so we're using a switch we weren't using before. But there's another switch, and it's your nervous system switch. And you should be going from sympathetic to parasympathetic. And if you aren't and that can be timed to your cycle. Power phases, you can go sympathetic. Nurture phase, you want to go more parasympathetic, and manifestation, ovulation time, you want to go more parasympathetic. So same concept. So now let's look at the tools that we have. Infrared sauna is a parasympathetic primer. It is phenomenal to do at ovulation and the week before your period. Fabulous. Whereas, like I said, cold plunges, although long-term it resets your dopamine system, long-term it has a really good effect on your parasympathetic nervous system. In the moment, it is a sympathetic trigger. And I'll use myself as an example. A couple weeks ago, I was at a retreat, and we were in not an infrared sauna. We were in just one of those outdoor saunas, which is probably more sympathetic driven. I got into that. It was really hot. I was sweating like crazy and my heart started pounding. And then I went into the cold plunge and then my heart started pounding more. I got out of the cold plunge. I was dizzy. I had a glucose monitor on and I saw that my glucose spiked in that whole experience. That was a sympathetic response. Now, I'm moving into menopause, so I don't have a cycle to time to, but it was insight as a menopausal woman. I'm trying to preserve progesterone. And so the next day, I opted out of both of those things. I was like, you know what? That was too taxing to my nervous system that I had this really hard heart palpitation, blood sugar goes up. That wasn't right for me. Now, did I want to do it the next day? Of course. Like I was euphoric when I got out and all the dopamine hits that you get, but I tapped into what my nervous system needed and said, I think I'm already stuck in sympathetic. I need to avoid that so I don't get locked in this fight or flight nervous system.
And I think part of the challenge too is that so many things in day-to-day life are sympathetic, whether it be the go with work and, taking care of kids and taking kids to different activities. And there is so much going on. You talked about being connected with email and there's so much happening that brings us into this system where we're go and activated, that if we're doing these things, again, just tying back to what we're talking about there, where our self-care is also activating us, it leads to this cycle of trouble.
Yeah. And I think we really need to pay attention to what you just said. Because just because a health influencer gets up on Instagram and says, this is going to change your life, what I want all women to say is, okay, well, where does that fit into my hormonal picture? Now, if you're perimenopause and postmenopause, you really have to think of progesterone. You're losing progesterone. We've done thousands of Dutch tests in my company, and crazy. I have not seen one woman over 40 with enough progesterone. And a part of that is because we're living in this really intense, rushing woman sort of world, this modern world. So if you know your progesterone's going down, I'm not saying don't cold plunge. I'm saying pulse your cold plunges. Don't do it every day. Pay attention to things like I talked about, where my heart was racing and I went, not the right tool for me today. Does that mean I'm not going to get a cold plunge? No, I want to get one in my backyard, but I want to learn how to use it to work with my sympathetic and parasympathetic and match it to my stress levels. The other tool you asked about what we could do for the parasympathetic is red light. Red light's super relaxing. So can we lean into red light that week before our period? Can we lean into red light at ovulation? And if I'm postmenopausal, could I lean into red light at the end of a really stressful day and just put some red light on me to just calm the nervous system down? It's these two opposing pieces of our nervous system and our metabolic system that is the elevation of the conversation around both biohacking and food and fasting. It's really the in and out, and knowing how to time that to whatever your hormonal needs. That is what we should be doing as women.
Part of your healing journey, and this ties into the fasting, is an Achilles tendon injury. And part of the healing of that, it was a nagging injury that went on. Talk about when that occurred and how fasting helped you heal that.
Yeah. I love this story. So I had the prelude to that story is my husband had pulled his Achilles tendon. He's a soccer player, and I watched how incredibly difficult that was. And about a year after he pulled his tendon, I started to feel some nagging on my Achilles, my left Achilles. And I'm a runner. I love running. It's my drug of choice. And so I was like, if I pull my Achilles and I'm not able to run, I may go crazy. So I tried everything. I mean, I tried every biohack. I tried every chiropractic massage, for months. I tried supplements. Nothing was moving the needle. So at last resort, I decided, okay, let me go back to the principles of fasting. What I know is on day 3, you're going to get a stem cell boot into your body. And what I know about the body is that it's so intelligent, it will know where to put those stem cells. So let me hope that I can stimulate stem cells and that the body figures out where to put it. So on day 3, I still felt the pain. Day 4, still felt the pain. I decided to keep fasting. Once the stem cell production is in, I've got now days where I'm getting stem cells surging through my body. On day 5, there was a buzz that started happening in my Achilles. And I went all the way to the end of day 5. By the end of day 5, the pain was completely gone. And that buzz continued for months. And to this day, I have never felt the pain again. So the way that I look at that is I turned on 2 days of stem cell production. Now, I could have paid $10,000, $20,000 to get a stem cell injection in there, but I was able to accomplish that just by going into this longer fast.
Let's talk about the timeline of stem cells when it comes to fasting, because the way I understood it from your book is you get earlier stem cells, I think, in the gut, and then further along, you get more of a systemic effect from them.
Yes, bingo. So the research on the gut, I want to point out, it's a mouse study. It's not a human study, but it was out of MIT. And what we know is that 24 hours, stem cells will kick in the intestinal tract and start to repair the gut. I have a feeling that it may come in a little bit earlier for humans, just based off of what I've seen and my own personal experience. So for any antibiotic use, any women that have been on birth control for years, people who are struggling with leaky gut, throwing a 24-hour fast once a week, once every couple of weeks at your body, it has to be, get it as true to 24 hours as possible, is going to have that systemic gut repair. It's going to create that gut repair you're looking for. But then we know at 72 hours, based off of Walter Longo's, that his research showed us that white blood cells, the old white blood cells, were sloughed off starting at 72 hours and new ones are formed. And it's in that stem cell production that we see these new white blood cells form. So systemically, it happens at about 72 hours. Now, the longer you stay in a fast, why I stayed 2 more days, is it's a switch. So I knew at 72 hours that stem cell switch was going to turn on. It may have come a little bit earlier, but then my brain thought, well, let me keep it on and see what my body does with these stem cells. And that's where on that 5th day, I saw a correction and a healing happen. Now, depending on how bad an injury is, depending on what you're trying to heal, you might have to stay in longer or shorter. And really becomes personal preference at that point.
When I mentioned the intestinal stem cells, it got me thinking about something else in your book I hadn't heard anybody else talk about, and that's the mobility of the microbiome that changes when we fast. So I'd love for you to talk about what happens there and why that's important.
Yeah, you got all the juicy parts of the book. I love it. There's something called geographical relocation that happens in the body where all of our microbes start to clump together in our intestinal tract. And when they're clumped together, what will happen is that they're not able to absorb our nutrients as much. And I learned this from Emran Mayer. I don't know if you've had him on your podcast. He wrote a book called Gut Immune Connection. And have you had him on your podcast?
I'm aware of him. He's on the list to look into trying to get on the show, but not yet.
Yeah, it was a really interesting discussion about how when we take these microbes in the gut and we get them out of these clumps, we start to get them so that they can start to spread out more, we actually are going to absorb our nutrients from our foods better. So like if you're struggling to get more B vitamins, you're struggling to get, some of the minerals like magnesium, you're trying to pull this out of your food, you need those microbes to not be clumped together. So fasting helps them unclump and become more separate so that nutrient absorption can happen. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say that happens in the gut is any bad bacteria, the longer you fast, will die off. So this is where you start to see people who get diarrhea and constipation. All that is the bad stuff dying off. Now, here's what's key, and one of my pet peeves in the fasting world is that people say, well, fasting's bad for your microbiome. And what I want to say is fasting changes your microbiome And in that change, you're going to see a lot of die off. You're going to see this relocation of the microbes. You're going to see this whole shift happen in the gut. And now what you need to be able to do is feed these microbes the right foods. So make sure you're doing enough polyphenol, probiotic, prebiotic foods so that you can sustain that new environment that you've given your body through fasting. So that there's two sides to the microbe question when it comes to fasting. It's what's happening when you're fasting and what are you reintroducing to keep those microbes thriving.
You mentioned there the bad bacteria dying off during a fast, which is great for us, but I'm curious why it's not more of like an antibiotic impact when we're not putting food in there for the bacteria. Like, why do the good guys survive and not the bad?
Well, I think what it does is, the way I look at it is the good guys change the internal environment. So what ends up happening is you're going to change the pH in the gut. And depending on which part of the gut you're talking about, when I say gut, it's stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. They all have different impacts when we're looking at fasting. But you're going to change the pH. You're going to change the microbes location. So that's going to start to happen. And that's going to be very unfavorable for these bad bacteria. They thrive in conditions that are maladaptive, that are not good. That's where they're going to thrive. So now you've changed the internal environment, so they die off. The good bacteria, you may lose. I've had a lot of discussion with experts about, do you kill any of the good bacteria when you're fasting? And my guess is you probably lose some good bacteria too. I can't find the research showing that they are saying that it's harmful to the good bacteria. But I like to really remind people that you've changed the environment to allow the good bacteria to thrive. So it's the environmental shift that is causing the bad to go and the good to thrive. And in that actual shifting, you may lose a few good, but the environment's there for them to regrow again.
And when it comes to fasting and shifting that environment for the good guys and also the unclumping, how long does that take?
That's a $1 million question. I would say if we look at research, it really is that 24-hour. It's getting to that 24-hour. And I can tell you from clinical experience, I've worked with a lot of patients who have had SIBO. SIBO to me is the hardest thing to help somebody with. And SIBO, when I put a patient with SIBO into these 24-hour fasts, we get a better shift in their SIBO symptoms than any supplement I could ever give them. So it depends on what you're trying to go after. One of my big concerns, and Stephen Gundry and I have talked about this numerous times, he really looks at leaky gut as what causes the energy slump that so many people get. And when I look at leaky gut, especially in women, I think of chronic years of birth control use. I think of multiple rounds of antibiotics. I think of foods, lathered in glyphosate. All of that is causing this leaky gut situation. And I think some of the shorter fasts, just a woman building a fasting lifestyle over time will heal a leaky gut. But when we need to heal something like SIBO, we definitely need to go into the longer fasts, like 24 hours.
Earlier, Mindy, you talked about the fact that when you started intermittent fasting, you got these benefits mentally. You were able to think better and sharper. Early on in our conversation, you mentioned dopamine. And this is, again, something I haven't heard other people talk about. The fact that when we push a fast, I think this is one of the longer fasts, we actually impact the dopamine system in the brain. So talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another really good one. So what I found in research, and this was years ago, researching for my YouTube channel, was several studies that show when you put somebody into a fasted state at 48 hours, you reboot the dopamine system. And what I mean by reboot is that you start to not only open up the dopamine receptor sites that may be saturated, but you are also creating new D2 receptor dopamine. There's several types of dopamine receptors. It's specifically the D2 receptors. You create new ones. Now, this study was originally done on people who are obese. So what they found is that overeaters, people who had food addiction problems, that when they were eating, they were not getting the same dopamine experience. So what they did is they took food out of the equation for 48 hours, and then they measured their dopamine system, and they saw these new receptors. They saw the whole dopamine system reboot itself. But then when they put these individuals back into a fed state, they enjoyed their food more. And so that they weren't needing to eat so much to get the same dopamine high. So from that research, I started looking at people who have mental health challenges. And so I went to my community and I was like, let's practice this 48-hour, and let's see those of you that have anxiety, those of you that have depression. I'm obviously a little more partial to women and how the benefits that can happen for women, especially perimenopausal women. There's a lot of depression that kicks in those years. I've heard so many women say, I don't know why I just don't feel joy the way I used to feel joy. And that's because that dopamine system has gotten so mucked up. So what we saw in our community was when we threw a 48-hour fast, the months after that fast, these women were experiencing more joy. So we see it in the literature, but it was built around the obese individual. And then now we've seen it with hundreds of thousands of women in our community. And it's pretty profound. That I think, maybe you read this, what's really cool is when we go into these longer fasts, we get more ketones. And as ketones go up, that elevation of ketones actually makes more GABA. And so you become calmer the longer you fast. So if you can get that calm, give an anxious person or a depressed and anxious person the ability to stay calm as they go into a 48-hour fast, reboot this system. Now, when they come out of it, they're going to have a different approach to their mental health challenges.
And did you mention before when we're fasting, the BDNF gets stimulated as well?
Yes. And BDNF, the research that I can find on BDNF really came from Ramadan. So, which is, I didn't put this fast in the book, but dry fasting is what you're really looking at with Ramadan. It's sun up to sundown, and it's done over 30 days, and it's no food or water. And it's in all the research, it shows about 12 hours is where you see BDNF come in at that point. But I think it comes in other areas for sure. And just ask anybody who fasts, and their ability to hold on to information is just incredible when you're in that. I think of it like, did you ever see that movie Limitless with Bradley Cooper?
Yeah.
And he takes the little pill. Yeah. And he can like speak all these languages and predict the stock market. That's what I feel like fasting does for you. It gives you that limitless feeling. And part of that is BDNF doing its magic on your brain.
A subject closely related to fasting. We've been focused on fasting, having periods where we're not having any food or drinks other than what we talked about before. But how do you feel about calorie restriction?
Yeah.
There's talk of that helping with longevity. So in this case, we're not being mindful of when we're having the calories, but we're just taking that calorie load down. So can you compare and contrast the two, fasting versus that, and how you feel about both? Obviously, we know how you feel about fasting, but the calorie restriction.
It's such a good question. So calorie restriction is hard. Let's just call it out. And it's hard to sustain, which is why so many diets fail. So yes, the research on longevity and calorie restriction is impressive, and we've known that for many years. It's just hard to sustain. The other problem that we have, and Jason Fung really brought this to our attention, was that when we decrease calories and we increase the output of energy, we actually start to change a set point. So every dieter knows this. You eat less, exercise more, you start to lose weight, and then you get burnt out, hard to sustain. So you go back to your old ways and you put the weight back on. The reason that happened was because you changed your set point. So when we look at the benefit of calorie restriction, you can still get calorie restriction if that's like your jam. You would just need and do it within a fasting window. For me, fasting is time restriction. And I personally don't think once you open up your eating window, you should count calories. But if you are sitting in the camp of, I'm a calorie restriction person, that is what I'm going to do, then more power to you if you can sustain it long term. And to avoid the set point change, you may want to put it in a certain time period.
As somebody who is so deeply involved in the world of fasting, what are the biggest mistakes you see people making on a regular basis?
It's such a good question. It's really loaded. So let me give you the most simple answer first, which is we do the same fast every single day, over and over and over again. It's, I call them the O matters. Most people got to this point as they started to learn fasting, and they felt so good in their fasting window that all they did was eat one meal a day, usually dinner. And the problem with that is eventually you're going to get stuck, because we have to, again, go back to our primal ancestors and look at how they lived. And they had a huge variation in when they got food and the timing of how they ate. So some days they would make a kill and they would have a feast maybe for 24 hours. They would have plenty of food, maybe 48 hours. And then they'd have to go back out again and start to find food, which is a fasted state. So when we come to fasting in this modern world, we really have to look at how do we vary that feast-famine cycling. And when we're doing the same fast over and over again, it works in the beginning, but then you get stuck. So that would be the first one. The second one is that people think fasting is a free pass to eat whatever you want. And the research is pretty convincing that you can eat some pretty toxic food. And if you pair that with like a 16-hour fast, your metabolic markers will all regulate. It's pretty cool. But I've seen people eating the wrong oils, eating refined flours, drinking toxic ingredients like Diet Coke and NutraSweet laden foods. And what we're seeing is that it's really hard to metabolically switch. It's really hard when your toxic load is that high from food to get into the real healing power of the fat burning state. So I would say those are the two biggest. And then, of course, my passion, as you know, is that women are not timing it to their cycle.
I want to pick apart the first point there a little bit and get into the nuances. You mentioned there the fact that a lot of people, and I've been guilty of this too, where you find intermittent fasting and you find a cycle or an eating window that works for you and you just kind of stick with that.
Yeah.
But the way I see that, and this is just further elaborating on what you said there, fasting is a hormetic stress, a good stress on the body when it's done for the right amount of time, for the right person, yada, yada.
Yep.
But if you get into that cadence where you're doing the same thing every day, is it correct to see that as the body just gets used to that and then that becomes the new normal?
Yes, it's really well said. So think of it like exercise. If you go to the gym and you do the same exercise over and over and over again, at first you'll get some results, but then you're not going to get the results will be more minimal because the body is done adapting. Whenever we want to build the body stronger, we have to force adaptation. And what I saw with the 1 meal a day people and on my YouTube channel so clearly about, 7 years ago, they all came onto my channel and I saw so clearly how people weren't mixing their fasts enough. And the classic statement was, I got great results with fasting and now those results have stopped. Basically, the interpretation of that is you're not applying enough hormetic stress. And so you have two moves at that point. You could either stop fasting for a week or two and then go back to it, or you could throw in some longer fasts and then go back into the shorter, which is, why I like to practice the 6 different length fasts that we talked about the last time.
When you mentioned there the fact that people hit a plateau and things don't continue to, improve with their health, are you generally speaking from a weight standpoint when they hit that plateau?
I think it's more than just weight. I think people notice the weight the most because that's what we're so focused on. But remember, when you fast and you switch over into this fat burning system, you are now in a healing system. So, you can repair your gut, you can reset the dopamine system, you can reset your immune system, you can get rid of senescent cells. I mean, there's so much magic over there. And so what most people notice is that they're not making as many ketones. They're not getting that same kind of really clear mind, powerful energy, great sleep. So it's beyond weight loss. They just noticed, God, I don't think this tool is working for me anymore. And if you think about it, Jesse, it's like every diet we've ever gone on, we do this. Right? We're like, hey, this is the greatest diet in the world. And then we go on it. We're like, oh my God, I got so many good results. And we stay on it, we stay on it, we stay on it. And then we go, wait, I don't think this diet's working anymore. So we're now applying the same thing to fasting. And if you want to overcome that, you're just going to need to keep dipping into the hormetic stress and use adaptation to your advantage.
Well, there's a lot of different benefits, and you've talked about some, and a lot of different nuances too. And you mentioned the female fasting quickly there versus the male. There's nuance between different people and different age and so many different variables. But let's take it to that weight loss example, because I think for a lot of people, that's what brings them to fasting, at least initially.
Yeah.
And we'll use, again, that specific example of when they hit a plateau. So we'll make a hypothetical person here. Somebody's overweight. They start intermittent fasting. Say they do a 16-8, so they're fasting for 16 hours a day, eating within that 8-hour window, and they're seeing results and they lose 20, 30 pounds, but they hit that plateau at that point and they don't seem to be losing any more weight. At that point, do you go to some of those different fasts you were talking about, or do you look at the diet at that point or lifestyle? Let's take this hypothetical situation and help that person out and break through this plateau.
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's start. I agree that diet should come in at that point, because a lot of people, when they start fasting, they forget that they got to think about diet. So I really like 3 pivotal changes that should pair with your fasting that will really help weight loss results. So the first is good oils, not bad oils. And, it's an easy change. Your taste buds are not going to care. But when you go out to eat, you're going to have to start to ask what oils they're cooking your food in. So bad oils are canola, cottonseed, corn, partially hydrogenated, soybean, vegetable, sunflower, safflower. Those are like the big bad oils. So get those out because they're making you insulin resistant. And add in the avocado, the olive oil, the sesame oil, the MCT oil. Those are nourishing, healthy oils. Second change, and this is beyond like even counting macros. I'm such a fan of people just turning towards nature's carbs, not man-made carbs. So just like we can't say all fats are the same, we can't say all carbs are the same. So just take out the refined, I don't care if it's gluten-free, I don't care if it's organic, take out the refined flours, the refined sugars, and lean into your potatoes, your rices, your fruits, your vegetables. Anything that came from the earth is a better carb. It's going to have more fiber. It's going to have a better blood sugar stabilizer for you. So make sure you're doing nature's, not man-mades. And then the last food change would be just avoid the toxic ingredients. I think the thing that has shocked me in watching so many people fast is how many people want to drink Diet Coke, or they want to, drink a soda that has some kind of like even stevia in it, like in their fasting window. And I just think if we can just take all chemicals out, if we can just drink water and maybe some coffee or some tea in your fasting window, I think that really, really helps. So to your point, cleaning up the food system is step 1. Second thing, you have 2 choices if you're getting stuck. One is you can move into a longer fast. So that's choice 1. That's going to be a hormetic stress for you. Or you could not fast. That also is going to be a hormetic stress for you. Now, if you're listening to this, you might be like, well, gee, the not fasting sounds a lot better. Might as well do that one first. And you're a bit right. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I have coached that have been avid fasters. They're not losing weight anymore. And the first thing I do is get them to stop fasting. And we go back to food. We look at blood sugar and how to pair meals together. And then we go back to fasting. We go to their favorite fast, and then I extend them into a longer fast. And for weight loss, just so we're clear, my favorite fast is a 36-hour fast. I have seen it unstick people's weight. That's what the literature shows. That's what we've seen. So it might be that you need to stop fasting for a couple of weeks and then go into, a 36-hour fast. That would be a really good shake it up so that your body can start to drop weight again.
All right, a lot of nuance there. And I really like that piece of stopping fasting if you're somebody who's caught in a fasting routine and doing that reset there. And you mentioned the fact macros, we're not going to count those, at least initially. If somebody has applied, taking the chemicals out, the bad oils, and they've cleaned up the diet where they're eating whole foods, is that where you'd start to look at the macros if they're still stuck and look at carbohydrates and how much of those they're consuming?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to me, there's 3 versions of keto. In Fast Like a Girl, I talk about ketobiotic. I feel like in general, it's a good version of keto. It gives you 50 grams net carbs. And just so we're clear, net carbs are total carbs minus the fiber. So if you're eating a lot of vegetables and a lot of fruit with a lot of fiber, you're going to get plenty of carbs in and to satisfy your brain and your taste buds. So I like ketobiotic as like that middle keto. But I've seen clinically that we've had to actually bring people down into low carbs sometimes. And low carb can be 10 grams of net carbs. This is like you're eating meat, you're eating protein. I don't know if we talked about this last time, but I like something called protein cycling, where you're bringing in protein every couple of hours, you're bringing in 30 grams of protein. The reason I like that is that it starts to stimulate an amino acid receptor in your muscle that builds your muscle stronger. As your muscle builds, you open up more insulin receptor sites and make yourself more insulin sensitive, which ultimately is going to help you lose weight. So the low keto and then turning around and increasing protein, and then doing that every couple of 2 to 3 hours with these 30-gram pulses in, that's killer. Like that you will lose weight really, really well. So that's another strategy. Now, the other version of keto beyond ketobiotic is that I often will pull, especially women, up to about 75 grams net carbs. And sometimes I'll even pull women up to 100. Now, let me tell you why. This is where the thyroid comes into consideration. So with thyroid health, and there's been a lot of talk in the fasting movement about this, with thyroid health, we have to have 2 things present for your thyroid hormone system to work. One is you have to have enough calories. So when people are doing 1 meal a day, that's not helping with the calorie. It's hard. I mean, you have to get about 1,200 to 1,500 calories in every day to keep the thyroid happy. So what I find with the 1 meal a dayers is that they just aren't getting enough calories in. Second thing is we really need carbohydrates for thyroid health. So if somebody's got a thyroid problem, I will take their version of keto and put it up to 75 net carbs or up to 100 net carbs. But again, remember, those carbs are coming from fruits and vegetables, and so that there's a lot of fiber in them. So that there's a whole lot of nuance in that. But that's kind of how, and I'm sure you've seen this, Jesse, where it's just like, we just say keto or we just say fasting and we just like give them these labels. But within these categories, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of personalization that people should know about.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for somebody who gets into lower carb, whether it be on one end of the spectrum, you mentioned going up to 100 grams net a day, all the way down to 10 on the other end of the spectrum, do you recommend the person doing that? Again, we're using this example here to lose weight. They've hit a plateau and they've gone through all these different steps to get here. Would you recommend for them on weekends to cycle some extra carbs in, or would that just be stick with that keto or keto-ish diet until they get to their weight loss goal? How do you feel about cycling in and out?
Yeah. So for men and postmenopausal women, I love taking the weekend and upping your carbs because you're hanging with friends, you're hanging with family. And I also have just noticed over the years that it's easier to stay disciplined Monday through Friday. Saturday and Sunday, it's kind of nice to not be as disciplined. So for men and for postmenopausal women, I like that idea a lot. For cycling women or perimenopausal women, I want you to increase your carbs at 2 times of the month. One during ovulation, I called it the manifestation phase in the book, but I want, day 10 to day 15, bring up those carbs because you need them for your other hormones, but you'll also be able to support the thyroid hormones. And then the week before your period, bring those carbs up. And then the rest of the time, you can go down into that lower carb. That's how we dodge the bullet of getting stuck. That's how we dodge the bullet of the thyroid tanking. It really, I can't tell you how well that works for women who have an active cycle.
That makes sense. And taking this even further, as we start talking about pulsing protein and getting the carbs down to the 10 net grams per day, it gets me thinking about carnivore, which is becoming quite popular in today's health world. So again, somebody stuck and they're having a challenge losing weight. Do you find that to be a viable option? And have you used that with people with great success?
Yeah. So the carnivore diet is fascinating. And I think it's hard for people to wrap their head around a little bit. So let me tell you the science behind it. The thing about meat, especially clean meat, is that there is nothing for your body to react to. So we're back at the oxalate lectin conversation. What we're finding is people with gut dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of bacteria in their gut or the terrain in their gut is off. Yes, when you eat kale, you're going to have an inflammatory response, and that's going to make you feel bloated, puffy. Your body's going to have this experience of feeling thicker than it is. You may even see it on the scale. So we've got to take everything out of your diet that your body could possibly react to, and vegetables are one of them. If you eat clean meat, you just don't react. It's crazy. The second thing that the carnivore diet does is it upregulates T regulatory cells. Now, this is really important because the T regulatory cells are part of what balances your immune system. So any autoimmune condition, even I've seen like SIBO, people who are reacting to vegetables all the time, if you just pulse in some carnivore days, you're going to feel all the inflammation go down. You're going to stay in that low keto place. You're going to drop weight and you're not going to be hungry. My only complaint about the carnivore diet is it's boring. It's hard. That's why I like to pulse it in. Like you would pulse it in on, for 2 or 3 days and then go back maybe to your mid-level keto or go what I call hormone feasting foods in the book. But it's a great reset for that metabolism if you're looking for that.
And Mindy, you personally, it sounds like you play around with it periodically, pulsing it in. What would it look like over a month period? What would your diet look like? Last time we focused a lot on the fasting. Today, I want to get a lot more into the foods and how you go about eating. Give us a month and how you might pulse that in and how you vary your diet over that period.
Yeah. Well, okay. So it's a bit of a loaded question because remember, for most of my 40s and early 50s, I've been eating and fasting for my cycle. So if in those days, and if you have a cycle, I like pulsing in carnivore day 1 to about day 10 or day 9, and then day 16 to day 19. Because you want to keep glucose down. Those are great opportunities to use the principles that are of healing of the carnivore diet. I'm now 7 months in to having no cycle. And so I think I'm heading into that official year where I can say I'm menopausal. So I pulse it in on a weekly basis and I do it based off of what I need. So, I would say if you look at like a 30-day period for me, it's now more weekly, where 5 days a week, I am looking at about 17, 18 hours of fasting every day. That's my comfort level. But then one day a week, I stretch my fast and I just do dinner. One day a week, I do nothing. During that time, my preferred way of eating is keto, this ketobiotic way. But I've also, as a 53-year-old woman, I'm upping my protein a lot more. So I'm breaking my fast with protein. I'm trying to get my fighting weight, the weight I like to be at is 130 pounds. So I'm really working to get 130 grams of protein in every day, which is a lot to try to get in. So currently, that is what my focus is low carb, low nature's carbs, more protein. And then I'm doing it more on a weekly basis right now as my body settles into a postmenopausal place. The other place I use it is like, I don't know if I told you this last time, I'm doing a fitness series with Tony Horton. Do you know who Tony Horton is?
Yeah, previous guest of the show.
Ah, nice. So P90X, I was a huge fan of P90X. I did it like every day for 3 years when I was in my early 40s. So I'm a huge Tony fan. So I taught him how to time fitness to the menstrual cycle. So he's got a whole set of videos that he's putting out called Power Sync, where we're going to show women how to do this. It's super cool. Anyways, we're filming next week. So, okay, let's just, if you're going to be on camera, you want to look as fit as possible. That's where I'm like, hey, couple of days of carnivore to just lean out, but you're not going to lose muscle. So I shared that as my personal journey. But if somebody was having that same, they wanted to look good for a wedding or they wanted to look good for some event, throw in a couple of days of carnivore. It leans you out really quickly.
You quickly touched on this program you're going to be filming, and now my curiosity is piqued. My hunch is that when it comes to exercise, you would time it, when it comes to the menstrual cycle, you would time it a lot like you're fasting within that cycle. So you have that period early on in the cycle where you can fast harder. Then you have your ovulation where you have to slow down a bit. Then you go back into the second power phase where you can fast hard again. And then you have to take it easy till the end of the cycle. So is it correct to say that during those two periods when you can fast harder, that's when you'd want to time those workouts that are more intense?
Yeah. Yeah. And you absolutely got it right. And this is why I named it the power phases, because I wanted to show that you could power up on your fast, you could power up on your keto, because these are tools that we've been using to get a better version of our body, to increase performance. But you can also power up on your HIIT training. You can power up on, if you want to run a marathon, those are good times. If you're a big CrossFitter and you want to push your workout, those are good times. When the hormones come in and they're peaking the week before our cycle and ovulation, we need to look at those different because those hormones are affecting us. With ovulation, I called it manifestation phase. You have the most amount of testosterone that you'll get a woman's whole cycle. So why don't we use that testosterone to build muscle? So heavier weights, but then you want those weights to be slow reps because you have the most amount of estrogen as well. And estrogen is going to make the ligament, which is the part of the muscle that attaches to the actual bone. It's going to make the ligament very, very tight, and it's going to make your tendon, which is the connection from the ligament to the muscle, it's going to make it very loose. So you're actually more prone to injury during ovulation. But you have all this testosterone. So this insight that I had is, why are we not cycling our workouts in a monthly cycle and using testosterone to really build muscle in the best way possible when it shows up? The week before your period, same rule applies. You don't want cortisol up. So pushing your workouts is not a great idea, just like pushing your fasts is not a great idea. I called it the nurture phase because really it's recovery. It should be yoga. It should be hiking. It should be, if you don't feel like working out, don't push through that mentality of, I gotta work out. So you're absolutely right. It's the same principles with just a few little nuances in it.
Just to make sure I got that nuance when it comes to ovulation. So it's a little bit different than fasting, I'm hearing, because if you exercise the right way, you can take advantage during ovulation of the testosterone
That's right.
and get gains during that period.
That's
But
right.
at the end of the cycle, for fasting and for exercise, you want to be gentle.
That's right. That's right. Once you understand the principles of when these hormones are coming in and out, you start to go, oh my God, I can time everything to it. And that's what I'm seeing women do. I even had a really cool discussion the other day with Kate Northrup, and she times her whole work schedule to her cycle. That was crazy. Like, it was really interesting to hear what she does.
Well, let's extrapolate this out then and talk about, we've done exercise, fasting. You're touching on work here. For women who are still in that phase of their life where they're having a monthly cycle, let's talk about when they'd want to do these different activities, when they would be, when their physiology would be most ideal.
Yeah. So there's this really interesting, I'll start with day one, but I just want to point out that the first 2 days when a woman is bleeding, there's like an interesting transition. We're going from high progesterone, all of a sudden progesterone crashes and estrogen is going to start to build. Those first 10 days, estrogen is starting to build. But the first 2 days of your cycle, your brain actually has access to both hemispheres, both the right and the left hemisphere. So you're crazy intuitive those first 2 days of your cycle. And like, words might not come out exactly how you want it because the brain is really using both hemispheres. So, and I'll explain why that's important in a moment. Then about 3 days in, estrogen starts to build. As estrogen builds, our mental clarity builds and our verbal processing skills improve. And so you become, from about day 2 all the way through into ovulation till day 15, that is a really good time to power up on your work. So what Kate said is she actually does more Zoom calls. She puts on more projects onto her calendar. So it is definitely, if you are a rushing woman, if you are a type A like me, and you just want to go, do it on around day 2 to day 15. When you come out of ovulation, again, there's like this dip in your hormones, but you're really starting to build progesterone. Your body's starting to ramp up. So as we move into that luteal phase, we move into that back half of the cycle, we have to start to think a little bit about slowing down. Now, it's not as important until you get to about day 19, day 20. And what Kate says she does is she cuts her workload in half. And she does everything slower. She spends a little more time in the morning in her meditation and her morning work. She talked about how even when she walks her kids to school, she walks a little slower. She doesn't put as many social events on her calendar. So she uses that truly like a nurture time to slow down and honor what progesterone wants, because progesterone doesn't want cortisol to be high. So what she does is she just keeps her cortisol in check as she moves into that back half of her cycle. So, and what's cool about this is even for postmenopausal women, you can even look at some of the things we know about the moon. A lot of people will say, like, at a full moon, you're super creative and you're super, it's a great time to start a project. Well, the full moon often correlates with ovulation. So that ovulation period, according to Kate, is a fertile time. It's a great time for creativity. Well, yeah, that makes sense, because during ovulation, we had estrogen at its peak, testosterone at its peak, and a little bit of progesterone. So, you really, if you're listening to this the first time and you're like, what the hell is she saying? Hang with me, because the more you understand that the way a woman's body works is very ebb and flow. And so our workload should ebb and flow. Our workout should ebb and flow. Our fast should ebb and flow. Everything should ebb and flow with these hormones. And once you learn the dance for yourself, it becomes much easier. And I don't know if you and I talked about this, but one of my favorite for postmenopausal women is you could look at the moon and just decide workload's going to be bigger in the waxing moon, and then I'm going to relax more in the waning moon.
We did touch on that at the end of our last conversation. So a lot of fascinating stuff here, and it brings up a couple different thoughts for me. One being that for women, unfortunately, this information isn't being taught on a grand scale. And there's two different layers. First of all, you have to get the information listening to something like this, and it's not being talked about a lot. And then secondarily, for a lot of women, they're working 9-to-5 jobs. And even if they are tuned into what we're talking about, their schedule, because of the way society's set up these days, isn't going to allow them to have variation in their days throughout the month. So it's like, okay, great. Now I know this, but I have the same grind every day at work when I go to the office. So I feel for women, and hopefully we're doing a good job here of at least tuning them into this information. And over time, as it becomes more widely known, hopefully employers can take this into consideration and how they have women working with them and embrace this nuance in this dance.
That's my hope, is that we've got to start the conversation. So if you're a woman listening to this and you're like, what? And you can't even wrap your head around it, keep learning, because as more of us come together and talk about this, then we're going to find a pattern that works. And a couple of things that I love that Kate said is, again, she does everything slow that week before. So if work demands are really, really high, don't pair a high work demand with a marathon the week before your period. Like those two are not going to fit together. Or start a new diet, or maybe you're going to party like a rock star on the weekend. Like those are not good habits to pair together if work is really high. You're going to have to really protect your downtime. You're going to have to create more space in your schedule in between the stress that week before your period. Second thing is that I love this idea. We talked, and this was an interview we did on my Resetter podcast. She said, we live in this culture where we're so programmed to answer everybody right away when they email us, when they message us on social media. She's like, if it's day 22 or day 23, could you just say to some emails like, hey, I'll get back to you, or say to some people, I'll get back to you in 48 hours. Like we don't always have to be in that instant satisfaction rush mode. So I think there's little nuances for the modern woman that we can take into consideration. And to your point, how can we integrate this from a corporate level? And I think it's just really understanding women's hormonal needs. And what I love about this idea is that let's say you're a CEO of a company and you're listening to this and you're like, wait a second, I could never allow the women in my 1,000 people in my corporation to slow down the week before their periods. What I'm saying is, let's teach women how to nurture themselves that week and see where they can slow down. But what you're going to notice is, if you honor that week before her period, you're going to get a more productive woman at the other times of your cycle. But what we're doing right now is we're just having women push on through every day of the month, and that's destroying her hormones. And now you've got PCOS, you've got infertility, you have mood disorders, you have menopause, perimenopause, all these you have hormonal cancers. All of these issues are coming to the surface for women because we're not honoring and learning how to teach a woman to ebb and flow with her hormones.
So you talked about being in your early 40s when you stumbled upon fasting. You're going through at least a mini health crisis at the time. What we haven't done to this point is talk about fasting for special populations. We touched on it, fasting for women, but we haven't gotten into what that looks like. So what I'm curious, you're in perimenopause at the time. What did you do when you got into fasting? And then all the knowledge you've learned over the last 10 years, what would you recommend to somebody in perimenopause that is different than your quote unquote average person?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I want to say is thank you for asking this question, because the perimenopausal years are really difficult, and they require different attention for sure. So, and here's the simple way that I can answer this is that estrogen does really well with fasting. And it does really well with keeping glucose low. If you go into keto and you fast when estrogen is coming in, surging into your body, you are going to really help with estrogen production. Progesterone, completely the opposite. If you go into fasting, if you go into keto when progesterone is making her debut, you are going to tank progesterone. So when we look at what happens in the perimenopausal years, which for me, perimenopausal years is, I used to say it started at 40, but we're seeing evidence now it's even starting in the mid 30s. And what happens is estrogen is doing this wild ride. Estrogen is high one day, it tanks the next. Up one day, tanks the next. For the perimenopausal woman, this is stressful. Like, you feel normal one day, the next day you're like, who hijacked my brain and body? So when we're looking to regulate estrogen for the perimenopausal woman, more fasting. And you want to time it to your cycle. This is what Fast Like a Girl is all about, is how do you time the length fast, and how do you time the low carb to the right hormone? And it's for all ages that way. Progesterone, it just starts tanking at 40, and it just goes down, 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 down. So that makes a perimenopausal woman feel anxious. It makes her hair start to thin out. So we hear about the hormonal hair a lot. It makes her body have trouble relaxing. It makes her hard to sleep. And that's all because of progesterone. So the first recommendation for these perimenopausal women is we've got to start tracking our cycle. And I would say around 45, I started tracking my cycle for like the first time in my life, which was hysterical. We should be tracking our cycle at 13, not starting at 45. And I started mapping where I was in my cycle. And when I was in around day 20 of my cycle, I stepped out of fasting and I went into carb loading. And carb loading for helping progesterone doesn't look like a box of pizza or a tub of ice cream. It looks like more root vegetables, more potatoes, tropical fruits, citrus fruits. These are not keto foods. But when we go to seduce progesterone to come out and help us out as perimenopausal women, we've got to not fast, and we've got to raise glucose so that we can make progesterone.
Okay, I want to make sure we get into the details here so I fully understand. So I think actually let's take a step back first and talk about before perimenopause. We'll come back to perimenopause and make sure we have everything sorted there. But let's talk about during a regular cycle, how you've already touched on hormones and how they change in the cycle, but let's get into it in a general sense and how somebody before hitting perimenopause and menopause wants to look at in your book, you do a 30-day cycle, and how we want to incorporate fasting throughout that. And then we'll move into later in life.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you see how complicated it was to write this book? You've got a lot of women at a lot of different phases. And sadly, we have a lot of 20-year-olds that are not even cycling because of environmental impacts. So to answer your question, here's the simplest way to understand it. From day one, which day one, a lot of women don't totally get that day one is the first day you're officially bleeding. Like you've got to use some feminine care products. It's not spotting, it's bleeding. So from day 1 to day 10, estrogen is starting to build. You can go low carb, you can fast. I call it in the book, I call it a power phase. I think all the names of hormones are so complicated, nobody can understand them. So I decided to rename the different phases. And the power phase is when you can power up on fasting. So day 1 to day 10, estrogen's coming in. Go ahead and go keto, go ahead and fast. Day 11 to day 15, you've got estrogen at her highest, and you've got this incredible 5-day period where testosterone came in and it's at its highest, and you have a little bit of progesterone coming in. So in the book, I call it the manifestation phase because these are our superpowers. We can manifest anything we want with all these hormones coming in. But we've got to make sure we don't fast too long during that time because progesterone is there. And just because you make a hormone doesn't mean you break it down. So we've got to be able to have a good amount of fiber coming in, a good amount of prebiotic, probiotic fuel to help the gut break these hormones down. So in this ovulation window, I tell people 15-hour fast, like maximum. If you're an expert faster, don't go more than that. And you don't want to be in keto. You want, a lot of people go into keto and they forget about vegetables and fruit. You want to go more into more fruits, more vegetables, more of what I call the hormone feasting foods. Then when we come out of that period, we go back into another power phase. Day 16 to about day 19, you can go keto again. Those hormones have dropped. And so you can go back to a very similar approach to the beginning of the cycle. And then about day 20, that's when we stop doing keto and fasting. We bring glucose back up. You even want to stop cortisol from surging. And in the book, I call it the nurture phase. You really want to nurture yourself. But again, nurturing yourself with a tub of ice cream is not nurturing yourself. It's called a dopamine rush. So that's kind of how we do it. It's like an in and out sort of variation that works the best with women's hormones.
All right, let me make sure I have this. So this is for women from when they start their period to about 35. They have a 10-day phase, the first power phase, where they can go into keto and they can fast longer and harder. Then there's about a 5-day period where they have to let up a little bit. They can still fast, but not as aggressively as before. Then there's a few days where you can go back into the power phase, keto diet, fasting a little bit harder. Then the last 10 days of that 30-day cycle, we're not going to fast anymore. We're going to be more gentle on the body. And then it begins all over again.
Yeah. You got it. You got it. And it's so interesting because, as women, we bitch about the week before our cycle all the time. We're like, I'm cranky. I don't feel like doing anything. I would just crave chocolate. I want to eat more carbs. And my answer to that is yeah, because that's what progesterone is demanding. Let's just do it from a healthy twist now. So you nailed it.
All right, let's come back into perimenopause now, and then we're going to go into menopause. Make sure we get the full spectrum here. So perimenopause, we went into this, but now with our new knowledge of how things work in a general sense, it sounds like during that period of time, the hormones are a bit erratic. Let's talk about how a woman during this phase, can understand the changes going on and what that means for fasting.
Yeah, this is the hardest one to really map out. So let me try to make it as simple as possible. So given that you just learned what I called the fasting cycle, what I just taught there, what most perimenopausal women, if you're 43 and you have a normal cycle, you're just going to follow the routine I just gave you. So this was actually my journey, is that I got so excited about fasting that at about 46, 47, my cycle completely stopped. And I was like, wait a second, is that what it's supposed to be doing? I ran a hormone test on myself and found out that all my hormones were tanked because I wasn't doing what I just explained around the fasting cycle. So if you have a 30-day or a 28-day cycle, go ahead and do it the way I just said it. Here's where we have a problem. As you get closer to going into menopause, you have a 60-day cycle, or you have I just had a 166-day cycle where I was like, okay, I'm going into menopause. And then all of a sudden my period showed back up. So what do you do in those moments? And here's the easiest way I can explain it is you want to get to know the characteristics of your hormones. And it's really estrogen and progesterone. So for the perimenopausal woman, if you don't have a cycle to track to, let's take the principles. If you start spotting, that is your body saying, hey, I need more progesterone. So you go through the fasting cycle, you hit day 30, and nothing's happened. Maybe on day 34, all of a sudden, you decide to go into more fasting and more keto, and then all of a sudden you start spotting. The minute spotting shows up, that's progesterone trying to make her appearance. Let's stop fasting. Let's raise glucose. The other thing we know about progesterone for perimenopausal women is you stop sleeping well. You're having horrible nights and you can't sleep. Then, okay, we need to step out of fasting for a couple of days and lean into more of these progesterone building, hormone building foods. The other thing that we have seen, again, is we can go back to the hair. Hair starts getting thin. You start getting more anxious. You start getting more hungry in the morning. That's progesterone all of a sudden saying, hey, feed me. So you really want to know your progesterone personality. And you also want to get a hormone test. I think everybody should get a hormone test so you know where you are. Estrogen, you're going to want, for a perimenopausal woman, you want to go into more of the keto and fasting path when estrogen is needing some support. So when estrogen is out of balance, it looks like this. Skin gets really dry. Mucosal membranes, your nasal cavity, vaginal area, completely dry. Cognition, you can't quite hold on to information the way you want. And hot flashes. Those are some of the biggest we see when estrogen has now made a big dip or is on this big roller coaster. On days like that, you're going to want to throw more fast at it to clean up that estrogen system. So tracking is important, but knowing these two personalities and then getting a hormone test is really helpful. I've even seen in our community where some women will do like an ovulation kit so they can actually kind of start to see where they are. Some of the women in our community use the Aura ring or any kind of biometric or Whoop, anything like that, which will show you that all of a sudden your heart rate variability goes up. That's a sign of progesterone coming in. Some women use CGMs as they'll just out of nowhere see that their glucose is higher. That's progesterone trying to give you a clue it needs some more support. So that's there's a lot of nuance for the perimenopausal woman.
Well, that's what I was going to get into. It sounds like at that point in your life, you need to be really tuned into your body, and there's a lot of subjective that you need to be paying attention to, and it's not as regimented as before in life.
That's right. And yet I can tell you as a woman who's gone through these perimenopausal years, fasting saved me. I mean, I have no idea mentally, physically, like where I would be. So I don't want women in those years to shy away from fasting. I just really want women to get to know their hormones. And we have a hormonal literacy problem in this world. So this is a great time to really get to know the characteristics of these two hormones.
When you're talking about toxins and supplements, you mentioned lead, which got me thinking about part of your story where you had a heavy metal problem and you needed to detox that. So take us to what point that was in your health journey and what you did to remedy that.
Yeah, it's such a good question. The short version of that story is that at 40, I really had one focus, and that was a number on the scale. And I had told myself at like 38, I want to be in the best shape of my life when I hit 40. So sure enough, 40 came. I was like, I had worked out a ton. I had restricted food. I didn't know about fasting back then. I was actually pretty paleo. I had done a ton of supplements. Like I did everything. And I felt amazing. By 42, 43, my health had completely unraveled. And I hadn't done anything. I hadn't changed anything. I kept that lifestyle going. And what I realized is that in those first 3 years, which is very common for a lot of women, I was starting to go into this perimenopausal phase. Now, in the initial phases of perimenopause, estrogen goes up and down and up and down. Like there are drastic changes in estrogen. That roller coaster ride of estrogen triggers certain toxins to come out of your system, lead being the biggest one. So lead came out of my system and it went up into the brain because that's what it'll do is it'll go up into fatty nervous tissue, which is what the brain is. And I started to notice depression for the first time in my life. Recalling words. That was crazy to me. Like I would be in the middle of a conversation. I'm like, what was I saying? Like there was literally like a whole thought would stop. I would walk into a room and not know why I walked into the room. I forgot stuff all the time. And what I realized is that this hormonal ride that I was now on was causing lead to come out of the tissues. And if you think about what menopausal women go through, there's a lot of talk about osteoporosis. Okay, well, why does a woman get osteoporosis as she goes through menopause? Well, or through that transition. Well, lead's coming out of the bone, destabilizing the bone, because it was in there, creating some stability. And so it's changing the inner matrix of the bone. So osteoporosis is a byproduct of this lead. It can be of the lead coming out, but where did that lead go? And it went up mostly into the brain. And so that's where I had to really go into some deep detoxing to deal with that.
So a lot of nuance I want to dig into within this. Where do you think that lead came from?
It's a great question too. So, well, the first thing is that we have tested thousands, probably hundreds of thousands by now, have heavy metal tests. Nobody has been free of lead. I have not seen anybody with a clean lead profile. I was born in 1969. Leaded gasoline, leaded paint. We didn't pull that out of many of the common things we were exposed to. I don't know if you know that there's actually some interesting studies done on learning disabilities of children that sit in classrooms that have old classrooms that have lead paint on them. So just because we look at the wall and we're like, hey, how could that come off into the air? There is an off-gassing of lead that we will breathe in, and it can be from paint, and it can go into our nervous system. So a lot of it is just the time I grew up. We don't have that as much now. The second thing, though, is it's generational. So these heavy metals, because they stay in our system, they get passed down from generation to generation. And I have done whole family heavy metal tests now, and I will tell you, you can see the lead is the highest in mom. It'll be the second highest in the firstborn. Then it's a little bit lower in the secondborn, and a little bit lower in the thirdborn, and you can see the whole pattern. So when I look at my family history, mom had osteoporosis and she had thyroid problems. We haven't tested her lead because I just didn't know. It's a provoked test that I like to do, and I didn't feel like that was going to be something that I could put my 70-year-old at the time mom through. My sister, so she had those issues, thyroid and osteoporosis and chronic pain. My sister in her 50s or in late 40s, started to get thyroid problems. So we tested her lead. Her lead was one of the highest I've ever seen. And then in my early 40s, I started to get sleeping challenges, depression, memory issues, hot flashes, and my level of lead was a little less than my sister's. So it's generational, and it's being passed down. And if that's the first time you're hearing that, I get that sounds crazy until you dive into it. Just go to Google Scholar and type in generational toxicity lead, and you will see the research on it.
So for you, Mindy, in your case, you waited till perimenopause. And this was interesting. I didn't know that because of the hormones at that time, you can expel lead from the bones. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But given what you know now, how would you have gone about dealing with that before it became a problem? So if you could go back to, say, 20, 30-year-old Mindy, would you do that provocation test and then do the similar protocol you did later? For people that might not know right now where they stand, who should get the testing done? It sounds like all of us are affected to some level. How does the quote-unquote average person right now who hasn't had symptoms from it determine where they're at? Should they do testing? I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing you can do is you could just look at patterns. So look at the patterns in your family, and then look at the patterns in your life. So some of the big things that we know heavy metals affect are chronic fatigue, memory issues, mood disorders, thyroid problems, inability to lose weight. And then you also see a lot of learning disabilities. So you can look for those patterns in family and go, we call it genetic because everybody has a thyroid problem in the family, but could there be something else in there? And that's where we start to see lead show up. To answer that one, I had reading challenges, reading comprehension challenges when I was a kid. I now know that was part of that was lead. After I had my son, my second child, I had a thyroid problem. That was lead coming out through pregnancy, because that's another time. Postpartum depression can be an influx or an outflux of this lead after pregnancy. And then I had the perimenopausal issues. So the cool thing about where I caught it at perimenopause is I corrected it. And I will tell you, my thyroid, I've never had a problem with my thyroid. And I strongly feel that's because I stopped it in my early 40s. So, but to answer your question, so I just want to kind of help people see the lifelong view of these heavy metals and where they show up. To answer your question, if I could go back to, the younger version of me, I would, in my 20s, I would have tested and I would have detoxed, and I would have done that before I got pregnant. Because I see the pattern in my daughter, who's my firstborn. I don't see it as much in my son, the second child, but in the first one, I see some issues around, anxiety, trouble sleeping, and I realize, there's a toxic load there. So we've been teaching her how to detox now at 23.
And for somebody who either has testing done and realizes they have metals in their body, or they just assume to do the detox, is this something you'd want to work with somebody? Because I've heard if you're not doing it correctly, you can end up reabsorbing the metals and toxins. Talk about what somebody to do if they want to do this the right way.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because it's not like you can just drink celery juice in the morning or decide that you're going to take some chlorella and all of a sudden now all the heavy metals out of your body. There are 3 phases to detoxing heavy metals. You got to prepare the detox organs. So that's liver support, gut support, lymph, make sure your lymph is moving, make sure you're sleeping so that you're, or at least committing to try to get some good sleep so that your brain, it will detox at night. You got to be sweating, make sure you're doing some breath work. And then, what we do, we have a program called the Thrive program where we teach this. What we do is we power people up with supplements temporarily to increase the detox organs so that they're well supported. And that can last anywhere from a month to 3 months, depending on how weak those organs are. Then you got to pull it out of the body, because you got to think of the body as like, if you're going to detox the brain, it's going to go into the body. So the body actually has to be prepared for the detox effect that you're going to try to create in the brain. So we usually spend a month or a couple months detoxing the body. And then the third phase will go to the brain and we'll detox the brain. So it can take 6 months to a year to help somebody detox properly. It's crazy the results when you're thorough and you're patient and you understand that process, how ridiculously effective that is. So to your point, it's not as simple as if somebody stands up there and they're like, take this supplement or do this chelation. You got to use binders. You have to cycle in and out. I mean, there's an art to it. And that's, we teach it, other people teach it, but my goal when I teach it is I want to teach somebody how to detox. So A, they don't need us anymore. And B, they can learn how to detox for life, because the world is not getting any less toxic.
For somebody who might just have a little bit of metals or different toxins in their body, they're not at the point where it's severe, it's affecting them, but now they're aware and they want to live preventatively and also chelate out if there's a little bit of, accumulation. Is there something that people can do on their own that's more gentle if they're not in that severe case where they need to work with a practitioner? Or is it just recommended to work with a practitioner?
Oh, no, I think this is good, because I always like to go, okay, what can we do today after you listen to this podcast? And I think thank you for bringing that up, because the goal is not like, health shouldn't be expensive for everybody. Like, we got to have some daily routines we can do that keep us moving in the right direction. That's why I love fasting. So for starters, look at your toxic load. So scan your whole environment. One of my favorite apps is called Think Dirty. And you can take Think Dirty and go around your whole house. And mostly it'll be your beauty products, and just see what's in there, see what the toxic load is. You can go to the Environmental Working Group site and you can actually type in your zip code and it'll tell you what's in your water. They have lists upon lists of toxins. So your first goal when you're detoxing is stop the influx. When you go to the dentist, don't let them put, the silver fillings in your mouth. And some people may want to actually get some of them removed by a proper dentist, like a biological dentist. But let's stop the influx. Second thing you can do is open up your detox pathways. So I mentioned this before, which is sweating. Are you sweating every day? Breath work. Are you doing breath work where, like that Wim Hof breathing is phenomenal? Are you moving? Are you getting out and getting circulation going through your system? And then are you sleeping? Because at night your brain shrinks so that the cerebral spinal fluid can go up and can wash the brain every night. So are you committed to sleep? Are you getting enough deep sleep? This is why I love all the biometric wearables right now, because we can see how much deep sleep we're getting. That's the first number I look at every morning is like, how much deep sleep did I get? Because I know that's how my brain detoxes.
You quickly mentioned there when you're going through that whole array of different areas, the water quality, which got me thinking about filtering water, which got me further thinking about different areas beyond water that we want to filter, whether that be air, our shower, our water. What are the different, again, it fits into this realm of being preventative and stopping the accumulation. Yeah. What different areas do you personally make sure you're filtering?
Well, air and water for sure. And I feel like I just keep adding to the water filters because there's the water is, here in America, it's like we look at other third world countries and we're like, oh, it's so sad they don't have clean water, but we don't even realize we don't have clean water. So definitely water filters are massively important. And then air filters. I'll tell you where I have, it's a non-negotiable for me. I have a major air filter in my bedroom. Because at night is when I'm looking at as a detox opportunity. So those are the two biggest. And then something as simple as, do you have a daily bowel movement? A lot of people, like I sat with so many patients when I would ask them like, how are your bowel movements? And they would say, oh yeah, they're pretty good. Like I think I go every 3 or 4 days. Okay, that's not a good bowel movement. You want to go every single day. And you need to get the stuff out that your body's trying to get rid of. So there's things like that. We've got coffee enemas and castor oil packs to open up the liver. I think that's phenomenal. And we have to look at a lot of these new detox strategies and realize that the reason we need more strategies is because we live in the most toxic time in human history. It's such a depressing topic. So if you're like listening to this and you're like, oh my God, I can't keep up. I hear you. And you're living in a different world today than you did 30 years ago. So we've got to start to adapt our lifestyle to this crazy new world that we're living in.
And it's a lot up front and it's a lot of learning, shows like this and different readings. But when you make the shifts, a lot of it's just easy maintenance after that. So it can be a lot for people, but and you also don't need to do it all today. You can take a piece of this. This is a long conversation. We've shared a lot here. Take a piece, build some inertia, and then just continue building on that.
Yeah. Like makeup's a big one. A lot of women that I talk to are like, no, like my makeup is perfect. My favorite perfume that I've worn forever. Like I am not changing that. So then I go, okay, well, go to Think Dirty and let's just see what score it gets because it'll score it. And then they come back and they're like, oh my God, it scored a 7, which would be horrible, or a 6 would be bad. Anything over a 3 is bad. And so my recommendation is, and the next thing typically they'll say is, but my makeup's so expensive. And I'll say, okay, just when you run out, what I'm going to ask is that you try to find a cleaner version. And you use, replace it one by one by one. And maybe at the end of a year, you've got it completely replaced. And I think that's the way that we can approach this. Otherwise, it's quite a daunting task.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to stop people in their tracks feeling overwhelmed. And I think it depends on the person too. If somebody's tuning into this and they have a chronic disease, they're type 2 diabetic or they have cancer, they might need to make, well, I would say they need to make more radical shifts in their health quicker than somebody who is 23 and feeling good but wants to live a long, healthy lifestyle. So you mentioned,
Yes.
taking a year with the makeup, the latter example there, that might be more applicable in that situation. So again, like everything we're talking about today, it's very nuanced and we're giving a general idea, but everybody's different and they need to apply what we're saying to their unique situation.
That's super well said, because if you're facing a diagnosis, you're going to want to, everything I just talked about or we've been talking about is like, yeah, you want to take it with the utmost seriousness and really dive in to look at your food, look at where your toxic load may be, your makeups, your supplements, your household cleaners, like your internal environment if you have a scary diagnosis. If you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I just don't want a scary diagnosis, or I want to slow down aging, or I want more energy, okay, then let's slowly unwind this toxic load that you have. And I think that's the conversation that's the most helpful for all of us. Because what I noticed in health is if we're overwhelmed, we don't take action. And I love this idea that people don't need motivation to be healthy, they need momentum. And so you can build momentum by just starting to make small change after small change and just watch how everything in your life and your energy and your brain and your sleep, and watch how it changes. That would be what I would tell like the 23-year-old is let's just start looking at where toxins are infiltrating in and what can we get rid of. Whereas the 45-year-old that was just given a breast cancer diagnosis, now's the time. Like we got to dive all in.
I agree. And when you're talking about your filtration for your water, it sounds like it's been an evolution and you've come to this powerful spot now. What are you doing for your water?
Oh my God, do you want to know? Okay, I have 3 things. So the first is I'm a big fan of reverse osmosis. So unfortunately, in my zip code, they put fluoride in our water. And that's a neurotoxin. So I want to make sure that filters out. So I have a reverse osmosis system. The second thing is I have in my kitchen a hydrogen water. Have you tried hydrogen water?
I have.
What do you think
Is
of it?
that with the capsules?
No, mine actually comes through a filter system. It's by Synergy Science. And what it does is it's just hydrogen, and we're back at the microbes. What it does is it really helps change the terrain of your gut and helps feed the microbes in a positive way. So my drinking water is now reverse osmosis with hydrogen water, so that I'm feeding my microbes. So that's my drinking water. And then I just added something else in. I don't know if you know Analemma, but they have a coherent water filter that actually makes sure that all water coming into your house, not just drinking water, but the water you're showering in, is the harmonic frequency of our cells. And the way that Mario, who created the product, calls it is that it is geared towards making sure that the cell is in a state of love. So I just added that in. And, here's the funny part of that story is that my 23-year-old moved home temporarily. And I'm like, let's see how if this is going to change the vibration of everybody in the house. So, but I'm not telling everybody to do that. I'm just saying that's how crazy I've gotten with water.
No, and it's fun. And again, you've been doing this for a long time and evolved to that place. I've tried some kind of hydrogen in water. I've tried a lot of things different companies have sent, and I enjoyed it, but I'll have to look into this, what you're talking about here.
You know what shocked me with my hydrogen water? It's called a Echo O2 machine. And you can just go to Synergy Science, is that when I water fast, it killed my hunger. So the first time I got it in my house, like on a Monday, and Wednesday I started a 3-day water fast. Both my husband and I did. And my husband's the biggest skeptic when it comes to all of this stuff. And I'm like, supposedly it kills your hunger. And that was the easiest 3-day water fast both of us have ever done. By the 3rd day, we're like, I guess, should we keep going? I don't know. Like we were just not hungry. It was really weird. So sometimes, this is also interesting, Jesse, is sometimes we're hungry because our microbes are hungry, not because we need food. So what happens is hydrogen water supplies that and is part of why it kills hunger.
And you're doing RO at the beginning, removing everything from the water. Do you add minerals back in?
It's a great question. I do a ton of minerals every day. That would be another one, liquid minerals that I've been adding in. So yes, I do add minerals back in.
Earlier, we talked about different lengths of fast. We've come back to this a couple times, and we talked about what you do in a typical day for fasting, but that only gives us a picture of one day. As somebody who is so tuned into this world and believes so much in this message of fasting, I'm curious, how do you use all those different fasts over, say, a year? Do you have a
Yeah.
period of time where you go fast for, 5 days, whatever it is? I'm curious how you plug that in over a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, women, I just want to say for the women, this is Fast Like a Girl is all about how you do just that according to your hormones. So, for women, I think we need to go in and out of these 6 different length fasts according to our hormones. And I created this tool called the fasting cycle that will allow women to pick the different length fasts that she wants to use and map it to her hormones. For putting that aside, once you've mastered fasting, you're getting this in and out rhythm. For both men and women, I like a week approach of what I call a 5-1-1. 5 days a week, you're doing 13 to 15 hours of fasting. 1 day a week, you're elongating that fast. If you can get to that 24-hour fast, fabulous. And 1 day a week, you're not fasting. That is a really good, solid way to start to vary your fast. Some of the people in our community have done a 4-2-1. 4 days a week of the intermittent fasting, 2 days a week elongating the fast, and then 1 day a week of not fasting. What you're trying to do is mimic what your cave ancestors did. So those are some weekly variations. Monthly variations, I like women to do it according to their cycle and to their hormones. I have a whole 30-day reset in there that all women of all hormonal needs can do. But on a yearly basis, if we take these 6 different length fasts, I strongly feel like a 3-day water fast for all humans would be well served, or all humans would be well served with it twice a year. And I like January and I like September. And the reason I like those two is that January, first thing, you've got the whole world doing something with their health. So it gets a lot easier. You're coming off the holidays. We're going to do a worldwide fast in celebration of this book this first week of January. So if you haven't done a 3-day water fast, I might be able to talk you into that, Jesse. I don't know. So twice a year, September, it's great because you're coming off the summer, depending on what hemisphere you're in. And it really helps you course correct. So twice a year for 3-day. I think once a quarter, throwing in a 36-hour fast or a 48-hour fast is great. I like a 24-hour fast once a week. If that's not within your reach, then I would do it at least once a month. So I look at it like you want to dip into these fasts and then you kind of come back to your normal rhythm. And then you dip into the longer ones and then you come back depending on what healing effect you're trying to create.
Yeah, I think it's really important we went into that because they, to me, seem like all different tools on the tool belt, depending on what your goals are. And I want to caveat this whole thing by it's going to depend on the individual person, what their goals are. If they have a lot of weight to lose and they're 300 pounds, they're going to have a different strategy than somebody who wants to be preventative and maintain their weight. So everybody needs to zoom out, look at this from their own goals and what they want to get out of this. But just to get an idea for people to have a template to look at.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked the question because we want the absolute again. And every time we're looking for the absolute, we lose when it comes to healthcare. So in the book, the 6 different fasts, what I do is I show you the science and then I show you the reasons you would pick those fasts. And then it's up to you whether you, when I read the audiobook, the sound engineers were men and they were like, this is a good book for men too. I'm like, yeah, the first section especially has all the science. So don't shy away from it, men, if you're wanting to know why you would go into these six different fasts. But think of them as a tool. I think of them like a Swiss Army knife. Like sometimes you pull out the screwdriver, sometimes you pull out the big knife, depending on what, sometimes you pull out the tweezers. What are you going to use? Where we have gone wrong in the fasting world is that we started to look at it being a one size fits all. And that is the whole premise I am trying to break apart. It is a bio-individual process. You can't tell anybody how to fast. You've got to decide for yourself what fasting tool you want for what healing effect you want to have occur in your body.
Great point. And before we part ways, I know we only have a few minutes left, but we did talk about for a woman who is still having her cycle, what it would look like over 30 days to fast, different periods there. We got into perimenopause and we were talking about your story. I want to make sure we come back to menopause now. So at what age does that occur so people can be aware? And then hormones are going to change in a big way for women at that point. What does fasting look like during that phase of life?
Yeah. So that's also so needed, this conversation. And, what I find with the menopausal women, well, let's talk about when it starts. Menopause is officially a year after when you haven't had a cycle for a year. So, and the best time, by the way, this is a big piece of what I want to get out into the world. The healthiest time for a woman to go into menopause is somewhere between 52 and 55, because it means that she can keep her estrogen levels up, and estrogen is cardioprotective and it's protective to the brain. So the fact that women are going into menopause earlier should be of concern to all of us. So I want to try to get women going as late as possible. Now, having said that, let's talk to the woman who hasn't had a cycle in over a year. So your estrogen is at its lowest, your progesterone's at its lowest. So you're going to want to dip in either to the weekly formula that I gave, like a 5-1-1. So 5 days a week, or really 6 days a week, you're focused on estrogen because that is a really big hormone we need to keep up for neurocognition and cardiovascular health. And 1 day a week, you're going to do a progesterone day where you don't fast and you raise glucose. If you know you're struggling with a lot of progesterone loss, you have a lot of anxiety, you're not sleeping, you may do 2 days a week where you are not fasting and the rest of the time you are fasting. Because the tricky part is you need to be able to fast to help estrogen and you need to be able to not fast to help progesterone. So you might try 2 days a week to pacify progesterone and 5 days a week where you are pacifying estrogen. So that's one strategy. Now, I'm going to totally trip you out on a concept that I've been talking about, and I didn't talk about it in the book, so it's really exciting to talk about it here. We do have some evidence that women cycle with the moon. Now, the problem that we have is that we don't all cycle with the moon because blue light is interfering with our hormonal ability to adapt to the moon cycle. But a lot of women cycle with the moon. So what we tell women in our community is at the full moon, think of that as ovulation. Most women, if we didn't have TVs, we didn't have computers, we didn't have light bulbs, we were back in the primal days, I am sure that those women all ovulated at the same time. And it was at the full moon. So in the book, I give this 30-day reset, and I'm encouraging menopausal women to really look at that part of ovulation and time it to the moon, and then we can start to work where there may be a natural rhythm that is occurring. It's a total nuanced kind of geeky thing, but it's fun to think about that we would actually be so connected to the earth and to the moon that way.
That's beautiful. And one more population before we part ways is the men. You talk about, I believe in your book, you said it's a 24-hour cycle for men, so totally different than women.
Yeah.
Given everything we've talked about today, how does it work for men when they want to plan out their fasts?
So we know from research, men can raise testosterone by like 2,000% with fasting. We also know that men, you guys get surges of testosterone every something like 15 minutes. So your hormones are really on a 24-hour cycle, to your point, whereas women, we get testosterone in a 5-day period during ovulation. So ours is really, our hormones are more on a monthly cycle. So I actually, as much as I hate saying this, men, you thrive with fasting a lot more than we do as women. You're going to get these results that I'm talking about a lot quicker. And I'm going to say So have compassion for the women in your life who may not lose as much weight as you're going to lose, but you will take fasting to a whole new level. So the only thing you have to think about is to make sure that you're not fasting all the time. We are not made to fast all the time. We are made for feast, famine cycling. So every few days, just don't fast as long, step out of fasting. A 5-1-1 may be your jam. I've already explained what that is. But you need to have at least 1 to 2 days a week where you're not fasting, and then the rest of the time you can fast. So, and it doesn't have to be timed to anything other than, making sure that you step out every once in a while. Metabolic health matters for everything. It matters for hormonal health. It matters for immune system, brain function, everything. So what I've noticed is if I can go to the most simple concept that the body has to be able to do to heal and to let all other systems work, it is we have to have balanced blood sugar. So, but here's the crazy part. This is the mind-blowing part, is that it's our microbes, we're back at the microbes, that are going to determine when we eat a meal what the blood sugar level will be from that meal. So a lot of people I saw in my world, in the fasting world, they were like, I'm doing everything you're telling me, but I can't seem to get into ketosis and I can't seem to bring my blood sugar down. That is a microbial imbalance that's contributing to a blood sugar spike. And when the blood sugar goes up, you're not able to switch over into ketosis enough to be able to get that benefit. That is a very nuanced piece of this conversation, but it's important because what we're seeing is that if I can put a CGM on somebody and I can work on the quality of their meals. I have this going on right now. I've been working with a very popular actress who's in her 30s, and we're trying to get her hormones back on track. Okay, I didn't start with giving her a bunch of fancy supplements. I started with, how do we get your blood sugar stable? And she was really leaning towards a vegan lifestyle. And so we put it on and I said, okay, just eat what you normally eat. And there were like a ton of spikes going up and down and up and down. And so now what I have her doing is, okay, can you put a fat with each one of those meals and let's see what the spikes do? Well, the spikes started coming down. Then I said, okay, can we add some protein in there? And this is where I'm not anti-vegetarian, but I had to get her to add in a little more either protein powder. She was a pescatarian. So she's experimenting with a little more meats, and adding those in with each meal. And you just see the blood sugar stabilizing. Just in 1 week, we dramatically shifted this. Now that I've got her seeing how to put the right blend of foods together, now I can teach her fasting. Now I can teach her hormones. But we can't move forward with people's health if those blood sugar spikes are still high and low. It makes everything else we do so much more difficult.
Got it. So the first step is getting the blood sugar regulated. This is new information to me where you talked about the microbiome being why there's that person-to-person variance, because I've known about the variance, and that's why the CGM can be so powerful, because we're going to all react differently to different foods. But now I know why, the microbiome. That's interesting. And so starting with that, we want to get our blood sugar regulated. And coming back to how I opened up the blood sugar piece, why this is so important, I want to make sure I hammer this home, the fact that you can be eating the cleanest diet, and you touched on this too, the fact that a lot of plant-based diets are going to be higher in carbs and they're going to cause those fluctuations in blood sugar more so. People can think they're doing everything right, but there's different levels to this diet where you want to make sure you're bringing in the proper nutrition. You want to make sure you're not bringing in toxins with that food. So that's where organic and grass-fed and better quality choices make sense. Then another layer is to make sure it's not spiking your blood sugar. So it's like you have to, it's like a 3D effect here, and you have to consider all the different pieces when it comes to how you're eating.
You got it. And I think this is why I fell in love with fasting, is because again, I would just want to honor the people listening to this that are like, what? What do I need to do? But I want you to understand this is why so many people are sick, is because we haven't talked about quality of food. We haven't talked about combination of food in the terms of the blood sugar issue. And I'm sure you saw the article that came out during the pandemic that showed only 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. Everybody else is metabolically unhealthy. Like we have a very, very small percentage of Americans that are metabolically fit. And the reason is because we're just eating for our taste buds, and these toxins and high sugared foods have just infiltrated our system, our food system. So we've got to take a step back. And what I found is fasting was the quickest way to change somebody's metabolic health. It's the fastest. So please make sure that you're fasting. But then the next thing would be exactly what you and I are talking about. Before you go keto and you start counting macros and you start getting into that, what's the food combination you're doing? Are you having protein and fat with every meal? I don't know if you remember the glycemic index was really popular years ago. We don't really talk about it anymore because there's so much, you could eat a banana and your microbes might love it, and they use it well, and it stabilizes your blood sugar. And I eat a banana, and all of a sudden, I've got a huge glucose spike. So there's just this personalized approach to nutrition is emerging. And if you put a CGM on, you'll be able to see what is working for you. That's the only way I know how to do it, which is why I love that tool.
And what's coming up for me as we talk about this, the fact that because it comes back to the microbiome, because as we eat different foods, that's going to change over a lifetime. Different foods are going to impact blood glucose differently at different phases. So It's not enough to take a CGM for a month and learn how you react to all your favorite foods. A couple of years down the line, if you've been eating different foods and different fermented foods and taking a probiotic and the microbiome's different, my hunch is that it's going to affect how the microbiome's going to process foods.
Oh, you're exactly right, and really good point. First time I put a CGM on was before we had them easily accessible like we do now. A friend of mine had a type 1 diabetic daughter, and she was swapping out her reader and asked me if I wanted to put one on. I'm like, yeah, of course I want to try it. And what I noticed at that point was when I ate protein, my blood sugar spiked like quite a bit. So then through all the principles that we've been teaching here, through the fasting and eating for my cycle, a year later, we finally started to have these at-home readers that were so easy to get. I put one on, and this has been a consistent finding me for a while, is that when I eat protein, my blood sugar drops. That's a change in my microbiome. And that's without a probiotic. That's doing all the things we're talking about here. That's fasting, that's fermented foods, that's variety, diversity of foods. Like I just spend a lot of time working on my microbiome. And because of that, I see the changes now in my blood sugar when I eat.
I want to make sure we have the order right here for people that are new to all this. Is it get the diet right, level out blood glucose, and then include fasting?
I like it that way. I think it's the easiest way to do it. But if you're struggling with cravings or you're struggling to make just food changes in general, pair it with something as simple as 13 hours of fasting and it'll get easier. But everybody wants to ask me, what's the first door into fasting? And I always say it's food. It's food. If you can jump into fasting after having a Western standard diet, but it may be a little painful. So if we clean up the diet a little bit and then we go to fasting, now we're going to find that natural rhythm, and and then your food choices are going to be different. So anyway, that's one approach that I've seen. Now, I do want to point out that there are some people that are food addicted, and that's a challenge because they can't seem to undo their cravings for some crazy things. So I'll give you an example. I had a man that came to me last year that was 300 pounds and he wanted to lose weight. And I said, tell me what your hurdle is. And he's like, I'm food addicted. I can't get off my horrible diet. He was drinking 12 sodas a day. So now logically, anybody listening to this would be like, well, dude, get off your 12 sodas a day and you're going to lose weight. But he told me that he was food addicted and he really struggled to be able to overcome that food addiction. So I just started compressing his eating window and I got him to 15 hours of fasting. First month, without changing his food, he was eating the standard horrible diet with 12 sodas a day. He lost 13 to 15 pounds that first month just by changing when he eats. Second month, I went in, I said, can we just up your protein? The reason that we upped protein is because it'll kill hunger. So I was like trying to see if I could, and it also, remember, protein will increase muscle size, improve insulin receptors in the muscle. So there's a lot of benefits to protein. So I was like, okay, let's just add some protein in. So we did that. Second month, he lost 9 pounds. Third month, I said, could you just take your sodas and drink them outside of the house? So every time you're in the house, you're not drinking soda, but you can have it outside the house. So he's still compressed his eating window. He's still upping his protein, and now his sodas are outside his house, loses another 12 pounds. So the guy's like down like almost 40 pounds in 3 months, still eating buffalo wings and French fries. We kept working at that. Within 6 months, he was completely off soda. And continuing to lose weight. So I say that to say there are some cases where we can use fasting to help overcome the craving and then add in some of this food that is really good, like protein, and then we will start to see that people are willing to let go of the old habits.
Again, coming back to our common theme where it's going to depend on the person and there's nuance to all this.
Yep.
I want to touch on something you quickly mentioned, the fact that when people want to start controlling their blood sugar and stopping it from spiking as much, they want to include fat and protein with the carbs. Let's give people some other hacks when they want to begin to help control blood sugar, how they go about eating, what they're eating, maybe different supplements or foods they can take to help regulate that.
Yeah. Well, let's keep it really simple because we've gotten really deep. So I just want to honor, if you've listened this far, like I get there's a lot of nuance, and I appreciate, Jesse, you taking me into the nuance because I think it's important. It's like the complete picture that everybody needs to hear. So let's start with, look at the combination of the meal you're putting together. Is there a fat? Is there a protein? Is there a carb? And is that carb nature's carbs, not a refined carb? Like that is like really good start to managing blood sugar. Second thing, before you go rush out and buy a supplement, is one of the greatest things you can do post-meal is go for a walk. Like just use that glucose. So that night walk, after dinner is amazing. If you can't walk, then squats. Just do some squats in a room. And because your legs, your thighs, and your glutes are big muscles. So if you just do 25, 50 squats after every single big meal, you're going to start to force that glucose to go into the muscles and power up the muscles. So super easy to do. And they don't cost any money, either of those. My third hack, one that everybody loves, and I resisted doing this video on YouTube. Everybody asked me for the longest time, could you please talk about apple cider vinegar? And I was like, okay, I don't really like apple cider vinegar, but there are some cool benefits. And the science shows that if you have a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, either before your meal or even post-meal, that it has the benefit of balancing your blood sugar. So try some apple cider vinegar around that meal and see how you do. Now, beyond that, we've got things like cinnamon and berberine, and we've got some other really interesting nutrients. So let's put this in the context of like a faster. Let's say you drink coffee and you like having some milk in it, and it spikes your blood sugar. Try putting some cinnamon in it. See if you can start to, and see how that will potentially lower your blood sugar. So those are some good hacks. Berberine, obviously, you got to get through a supplement. But I like those hacks before I reach for a supplement. Again, the supplement should be supplementing a lifestyle that is regulating blood sugar.
An important area I want to make sure we hit on that ties into all of this while we talk about blood sugar is insulin. And it's come up a couple times.
Yeah.
So let's tie this into insulin resistance and insulin behind the scenes as we're spiking our blood sugar, what's happening there?
So remember that insulin is the glucose storing hormone. So it's going to push glucose into the cells so your cells can use it. Every time you eat and your blood sugar spikes, insulin goes up. So we go back to the conversation when you're getting these spikes going up and down and up and down. What's happening is each spike there's another set of insulin going into your system. The more spikes we have of insulin throughout a day, at some point, two things happen. One is the cells become deaf to it. Anybody who has a kid knows the more you ask them, the less they're willing to do it. Or I always say sometimes husbands are that way too. And so, it's the more insulin, the less the cells are able to use it. So the spikes really, really matter. Second thing that I want to point out on insulin and glucose, and this is one that I think is really not talked enough about, and that is that when you have all this extra sugar, when you have all this extra insulin, and the cells can't use it, your body has to store it. So where will it store it? And it stores it in fat. Now, let's think about what we do. We go and we look in the mirror and we see the areas that are fat on us and we villainize it. I must not be disciplined enough. Why is it showing up that way? But really, your body just found a place to store fat to save your life. It didn't want to store it in your heart and lungs, didn't want to store it in your liver because ultimately that will be your demise. So the name of the insulin game is make less of it. And you can do that through all the strategies we're talking about with glucose. Manage glucose and you won't get insulin spikes throughout the day. And with less insulin spikes comes less need to store both glucose and insulin as fat.
And the scary thing about insulin is behind the scenes, as we're causing insulin spikes and building up insulin resistance, that can happen in the background for years without any signs or symptoms while it's destroying your health.
That's right.
So, it's important to be aware of all this because insulin resistance, again, can be destroying things and you only realize that later on down the line when things are totally falling apart.
A really good measurement of where you are on the insulin glucose sensitivity range is hemoglobin A1C. So if you're getting yearly blood work, your doctor's doing hemoglobin A1C. If it's above 5, then you are moving towards insulin resistance. If it's at 5 or less, you've got great glucose insulin sensitivity. And I want to point out one thing on hemoglobin A1C that is not talked about enough. If your hemoglobin A1C is 5.5 or it's 6, yes, they'll say you're pre-diabetic or you're diabetic. But really what that means is that your red blood cells, which are the cells that carry oxygen, are gummed up with glucose molecules. So they're not getting oxygen to your brain. They're not getting oxygen to your skin, to your muscles. You are not getting oxygenated because the glucose got stuck on the outside of that red blood cell. I personally think the two biggest measurements on blood tests that everybody should look at and everybody should run every year is they need to look at hemoglobin A1C and vitamin D. Those two are massively important for our long-term health.
I just want to make sure I'm clear because I didn't know this. Hemoglobin A1C will catch insulin resistance? Because the way I understood it was blood glucose can be high for a period of time. We make more and more insulin as we become more resistant, trying to bring that glucose into the cells. And then again, we don't realize that we're having all kinds of blood sugar problems because we're making more insulin till years down the line and we're insulin resistant. But you're saying the A1C test will catch that.
Yeah, because think about it. Insulin's there to push glucose into the cell so it can be used for energy by the mitochondria. But if hemoglobin A1C is high, that meant that the extra glucose not only went to fat, but it's gumming up the red blood cell. So that insulin system is not being used properly.
Now that you're done with Mindy, you're going to want to head over here and catch my episode with Dr. Jason Fung. He's got a lot more to share when it comes to fasting and weight loss. I'll see you over there.
From a scientific mathematical standpoint, it's actually very, very obvious what needs to be done. You need to change the hormones, not the number of